You're listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. This CD was selected to help you build your income, get out of debt, and prosper in any economy. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future. New York Times best-selling author Orrin Woodward holds 4 U.S. patents, has been named one of Inc. magazine's top 50 leadership and management experts, and is a Guinness World Record holder. Chris Brady is a New York Times best-selling author, one of Inc. magazine's top 50 leadership and management experts, and is one of the top 100 authors to follow on Twitter.
This is Chris Brady and Orrin Woodward reporting in from beautiful Maui, Hawaii. It seems that we end up doing a lot of different trips and meeting up in a lot of fun places, and we always get inspired to share a little bit about what we've been learning from some of our studies and our experience, and today is going to be no different. We're going to cover more on the topic of personal finance. We're here today to discuss a few of those principles in the hopes that it'll help you guys that are listening to this clean up your financial life if you haven't already, learn some principles and apply them, and live the life of your dreams and really make a big impact with the resources that you get blessed with through the fruit of your labor. So what we thought we'd do is cover a topic called the offense and defense of personal finance. So, Orrin, you want to comment on that as a topic?
I love that title because if you follow American football, it's like you don't see people winning a Super Bowl championship that are great offensively only. I mean, they've got to play offense, but you also got to be able to play defense and even throw in special teams. And that's true in life for finances, too. I don't care how much money. I know people that make millions of dollars a year that will file for bankruptcy because their spending habits, their defensive strategy isn't up to speed. And I know people that make 20, 30, 40,000 and they save and they're miser on every penny and they basically go through life and never enjoy anything because they're attempting to make $1 million by saving 10% or 20% over 50 years or whatever. And so to me, I love this talk because yes, you have to go out and make money and then you got to know how to defend the gains that you've made, conquer and fortify.
Yeah, when you talk about sports, they say that it's always defense that ends up winning championships. You can't win entirely on defense, but it's generally the teams that have the best defenses that end up winning championships. You know, what you just kind of mentioned it, Orrin, talking about being a miser or whatever. On one side, there's people who almost worship money. They're almost over the top, too concerned about it, too watching it, too involved in money. And on the other side, there's people who waste money. They don't value it at all, and they act like they shouldn't respect it and shouldn't retain any of it. You know, and so there's the worship or waste extremes. And what we're going to talk about today is how to play the game in between, right down the middle of those two. And, you know, we've started other talks this way, but the way to get wealthy is you have to make more than you spend, and you have to spend less than you make. You have to do both. And in that sentence comes the offense and defense of wealth. Over time. Because time is a big factor in accumulating any kind of accomplishment, whether it's stacking up some wealth or accomplishing big things in your career or whatever it might be.
That gives you the leverage. I mean, over time, if you're doing the right things, incrementally over time, eventually it becomes great results.
Well, let's go through just a few of the misconceptions about wealth and what wealth is. One thing is that this is probably because of the modern marketing that takes place. We're bombarded with images of what it means to be a success, and people tend to grab onto trinkets and trophies to almost try to signify and advertise that they're somebody special. And we've been conditioned to think this first one, that a lavish lifestyle equals wealth.
And, you know, how many times do you see someone that has 3-4 cars and they've got the nice house and they're putting the swimming pool, and then 6 months later to a year later, they're filing bankruptcy. It's like you can have a lavish lifestyle and you can borrow money and you can put things on credit card, et cetera, and you can look like, boy, they look like a success. But one of the principles that we've taught for many years, Chris, is we don't want to look successful until we are successful. In other words, it's okay to drive a used vehicle on your way up. It's okay to sacrifice or delay some of the gratification, and you don't have to have the results of a multimillionaire when you're not at that point. So many people try to keep up with the Joneses and put themselves into a position where one tug, one lost job, one economic downturn, and boom, they're bobbers under the water and they're drowning.
You know, you can kind of, you mentioned it, a lot of people are trying to act wealthy. One of the things the research actually shows is that there are a whole group of people out there that act rich.
Yep.
They come up in their mind with what they think wealth is, and they act that way, and they use financing, they use credit, and they waste their money, and they try to look the part. there's a whole nother group out there that actually are rich. They have made the money. And, there's a very small percentage of people that have inherited some wealth, some real crazy people at the upper point, probably 0.1% of the American population that inherited it and lives off trust funds and that kind of thing. We're not going to talk about that because none of us were able to be born into any of those families. So we already missed out on that one. But the rest of the millionaires and multimillionaires and even billionaires in the United States actually earned it in their lifetime. They did it by the sweat of their brow, almost always by building a business or coming up with something with a huge amount of leverage attached to it. And they actually are rich. But if you were to consider these two groups of people, those who act rich and those who are rich, and picture each being a circle, in your mind, have a circle over here on the left, and right in the middle of that circle, say people who act rich. And then over here on the right, picture a circle that says in the middle of it, people who are rich. Now move the circles toward each other until the edges touch, and then overlap them a little bit more. And what you got on the left are people who act rich but aren't. And what you got on the right are people who are rich but don't act rich. And then in the middle, you got a small slice of people who some have called the glittering rich. Those are the ones who are rich, and they look like they're rich. These might be Hollywood superstars or top athletes who drive a Lamborghini to practice or whatever. And those are the people that the people who act rich are emulating, when really the vast majority of rich people don't take pleasure in their money. They take pleasure in performance and excellence and achievement, and money just follows because they're so good at what they do. So really, if you want to emulate the rich, you should probably put your efforts into something that has lasting significance and puts value in other people's lives. The sentence that I wrote down goes like this: people spend like idiots to try to emulate the rich when the rich don't live like that anyway.
That's good. That reminds me of the story. I love this story of the difference between people who actually go out and earn their wealth and people who are given their wealth. It's a guy's a successful business owner. He decided to give his business to his son, and he says, "But son, before I give you this business, I want you to go out on your own and go earn $300. And so he said, "All right, I'm going to go out there." And his mom says, "Hey, you don't have to go out there and earn that $300. Here, take this $300 and just go in there and say you earned it. And then your dad will give your business and you'll be set for life." And so he walks into his dad, and his dad's reading a business book, and he says, "Here's the $300 I earned." And his dad, without even looking up, just grabs the money and throws it into the fire. And the son's like, "Dad, what are you doing? You just threw $300 away, man, Dad." And he said, and he looks up and he says, "Son, I told you to go earn $300. And he comes back, and his mom said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, he didn't give me the business. He said I didn't earn that money." He said, "Well, son, here's 300 more. This time go dirty yourself up and take a few days, and so that he can be convinced that you went out and earned it." So he comes back in with some oil. "All right, here you go. I earned this $300. And again, the dad, without looking up, just throws it in the fire. He goes, "Dad, you just threw another $300. $600 you just threw away. What are you doing? Are you going crazy?" Then he said, "I told you to go earn it." And he comes back out, and the mom asked him and said, "Nope, Mom, I'm going to go earn it." So he went out and mowed lawns, and he went out and did all the things he had to do and earned $300. And he came back in and he handed it to his dad. "Dad, this time I earned the $300. Again, the dad, without looking up, throws it into the fire. And the son dives into the fire to grab his $300 because that's his $300 he just threw in there. And the dad says, "I see you have earned this $300. And he gave him the business. And that's so important. The people who earn money respect their money and don't spend it frivolously and try to have all this pizzazz, because they know that the things don't define them. Who they became on the journey of success is what defines them. So they don't need all the bling and all the stuff to feel good about themselves, because they felt good about themselves through becoming successful."
That's right. And that's a key point. You can't really talk about wealth until you help people develop the proper worldview, because really true wealth is who you become, not what you achieve.
That's right.
What you are, not what you get. Well, I was talking about people who act rich and then people who are rich. The one thing that's true of everybody in that circle where we wrote the words people who are rich is that they live below their means. And the glittering rich who do drive the fancy cars and stuff, they might make $19 million a year as the quarterback of the New England Patriots, and they drive a $100,000 car. That's a very small percentage of their income. These people are also found to give a higher percentage than the people who are just acting rich and spending all their money on a lifestyle of status to impress people who actually never seem to have any money to give to causes and stuff. So the key is you live within your means. And Orrin, you said it. It's much more about independence, freedom, security. That's really true wealth, is how many days can you live free without having to go out and earn more money. And that's what the research shows, is that America's millionaires and billionaires, wealth to them means freedom, independence, and security. So all right, let's bust another myth about wealth. Some people think income is wealth. They think if I just made more, I'd be wealthy. What do you say to that?
Well, again, I mean, I know many people that can make a ton of money, but I don't care how much money you pour into a bucket. If there's a hole at the bottom of the bucket, you can pour in all kinds of water and it's all going to drain out. So again, that gets back to the offense defense, and no amount of income does not determine whether you're wealthy. It's the difference between the amount of income and the amount of expenditures over time that determine wealth.
Yeah, just because we make a lot doesn't mean
Not
we're
at all.
wealthy.
That's right.
Another one would be that wealth comes from luck, inheritance, or breaks. And one of the reasons I think people like these is because that gives them excuse for not being wealthy themselves. As long as it's something that's an assignable cause to something outside of themselves, say, well, I didn't have that luck. I wasn't born rich. I didn't have those kind of breaks. I didn't have those connections. And it's a way to explain away the fact that we don't achieve. But actually, most wealth is earned by people in their lifetime.
You know, I put on Twitter the other day, I know both you and I, when we come up with different quotes, we'll put them on our Twitter accounts. And I put on there, excellence is a choice, not a circumstance. And it's like, if you're going to succeed in life, it's a matter of your choices. Don't tell me about your circumstances. I know many people that are extremely successful. They had circumstances of growing up in inner cities, had been through all kinds of pain and misery in their life. But at some point, they decided that they made a choice that they weren't going down anymore. And they started making consistent right choices, developing the right habits, and over time you win. So don't tell me about your circumstances. Tell me about your choices, because that determines your success.
And our success is under our control.
It is.
Another myth is that wealth equals happiness. If I were wealthy, I would be happy.
Well, you can be as wealthy as you want to be, but if you're not right inside, if you don't have if who you are, if you're not comfortable with who you are, I don't care if you're a millionaire or have no money, money is not going to determine happiness. Money gives you choices, but those choices aren't going to make a hill of beans difference. If you're unhappy in the inside, you can be unhappy in Hawaii just as much as you can be unhappy in Flint, Michigan, where I grew up and you grew up, or unhappy anywhere. So happiness is a state of mind. In fact, Abraham Lincoln said, man's about as happy as he makes up his mind to be.
That's right. One millionaire I saw in some research said that money might make life easier, but it doesn't necessarily make it better.
That's right.
And I take that a little farther and say being better is the only thing that makes life better. When you become better yourself. You know, most millionaires, it's about being and not about having. There's an achievement, satisfaction. There's also a calling factor. You know, when someone feels like they're doing what they were built to do, what God called them to do, they feel led to do it. They feel like they've been gifted in that area to some degree. And when you're doing what God meant you to do and you're in line with his will for your life, there's some happiness there that has nothing to do with dollar signs attached to it.
Happiness is not something that can be pursued directly. Happiness is an indirect result from chasing or fulfilling your purpose in life. When you're doing what you are called to do, then out of doing what you're called to do, there is a sense of joy or a sense of happiness that comes like, man, I'm finally doing what I was called to do. And there's a happiness that comes with that. But you can have all the money in the world and think, all right, I'm going to fly down to Switzerland, or I'm going to fly down to Bora Bora, and that'll make me happy. And you'll do all that, and then you'll find that you're just as unhappy in Bora Bora, because until you start fulfilling your purpose, you're not going to be happy, because happiness is not something that you can buy directly. It's a byproduct of fulfilling your purpose.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And serving others, although, you know, there's no short route to wealth. There's really no shortcut to wealth, but there is a shortcut to happiness, and the shortcut to happiness is serving others. Find someone to serve. And a lot of times what we were built to do involves somehow imparting value to others, and that makes us happy. And if you do it right, a lot of times that is monetized. You can make money helping people if you deliver more than you promised and amaze your customers or your boss or your organization. Well, those are just some of the myths of wealth. And it's important to lay that foundation before we start talking about going on offense, because if someone were to go on offense thinking that wealth would make them happy, we would be leading them down a desperate trail. But now we do want to talk about going on offense, because, yes, you can have a really chintzy offense and have a really good defense and eat out of the same lunch bag 5 days in a row and turn your underwear inside out. And I mean, you can get really crazy. And there's people at the lunatic fringe that chase every nickel that they can ever find. And I don't think that makes you very fun to live with. And I don't think it makes for a very fulfilling life. So we enjoy talking about offense when it comes to personal finance. And we suggest people go after a big income, but in line with the principles that we just talked about. You certainly don't want to go after a big income just because it's a big income. You don't want to do something you absolutely deplore and hate just because you get a good paycheck, because then you probably will be led to waste your money on things thinking that that'll make you feel better about the fact that you hate what you do to earn your money. It's like a vicious cycle. So we recommend that you go after a big offensive play. Would start with something that you enjoy doing.
There's a thought.
Something in line with your causes and beliefs and principles.
J. Paul Getty, in his book, How to Be Rich, said the first key to financial success is own your own business. And it's amazing. I mean, here we are in America, free enterprise, and the West mostly free enterprise. And the ability to own your own business, it requires sacrifice or a delayed gratification to do that, because you don't get paid until everybody else is paid. When you start your own business, man, if you say you open up a restaurant or something like that, all of a sudden you've got to pay your employees, you've got to pay for the food, you've got to serve the customer, and then maybe if you do all that right, pay your rent, if you do all these things right, if there's any money left over, then you get to pay yourself. And I think that's why a lot of people never go on offense, because what they do is they settle for a job. And what a job is you get just enough money and you get paid right up front, because you say, listen, I don't have the faith to delay the gratification. I want my money right now. And so they give it to you, but you're paid in full. But a successful business owner delays, and it builds up over time, and eventually gets to the point where, hey, he might not have to show up to the office or show up to his business every day, and yet money's coming in because he's created it into systems. And so I think one of the biggest things for offense is find your purpose or something you love to do, and then figure out how to monetize it in your own business. Because, if you look at it, as long as you're working for somebody else, they're the ones making the lion's share of the profits off of your efforts.
That's right. I think one of the keys is that you have something you can build up over time as an asset. And I like Robert Kiyosaki's definition of an asset as something that kicks income from it. It gives cash flow over time.
Right.
So you pour energies into building up an asset in a business that you own, and over time, the more valuable that you make that, the more wealthy it makes you.
That's good.
Another feature of this is look for something that's ongoing and residual. You could start your own business where you're basically renting yourself out to do some task. But again, you're going to be at a dead-end road. It's really a small business ownership where you're still trading yourself for the exchange of money. It would be much better to build up a system, like you said already,
right,
of ongoing residual income.
A lot of businesses are really just you bought yourself a job, and that's not what I'm talking about. When I'm saying build a business, I'm saying build that equity and build that asset, like you were saying. I mean, even something as simple as, if you built an asset that kicks off $1,000 a month, well, think about what size house you'd have to be able to rent, to be able to bring in $1,000 after all costs, $1,000 profit a month. Think about how much money you'd have to have in the bank in order to make $1,000 a month as an asset. I mean, that's a pretty good size asset. That's a sellable asset, where a job, they paid it to you once and it's done. Unless you show up, you don't have it. But you build up an asset that's kicking off that income. That's a significant difference than a job making the same amount of money.
That's right. Or a business where it's just you slaving away at the grind and trading. Okay, I make $500 an hour consulting to do X, Y, Z, but you have to be there. You're the one in the airplane seat doing that all the time. So, fanaticism is not a sustainable business strategy. So good. Anything that you have to be a fanatic for, even for any amount of time, is not long-term sustainable. So we have to find ways to take ownership of something we can build up equity in that is in line with our causes and beliefs that we enjoy doing, and build ongoing residual income. We can build up an asset that cash flows into our life long-term. And I think that long-term is the key. What do you think about being long-term focused?
To me, it's everything. You've got to have it. Anything you do, so many people, they'll start something of like, I'm going to go out and dig for gold. And they start digging for gold. And it's amazing how many people, they get 100, 200, 300 feet deep, and they're only a couple feet away from striking the big gold mine. And yet they're, I stopped that and I ran off in another direction. And there's so many people in life, the story of their life is bouncing from one thing to another, looking for some get rich quick or something. And so because they ran off in 4 or 5 different directions, they never spent, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, the 10,000 hours to master any one field. And until you get to that point of mastery, man, 10,000 hours is a long time. That's 10 years years plus of sustained effort in one specific field. And so when people are like, well, I tried that for a year, I tried that for 3 years, I'm like, well, you can't try something for 3 years and get good. It might have been something you'd been great at,
That's right.
but you didn't stick around long term enough. Then can you imagine if the Beatles, when they started, well, we tried it for a couple months, it just didn't work out. No, I mean, the amazing stories of people, Sam Walton, man, he was in retail for a long time before anybody ever heard of him.
He was in his 40s before he even launched Walmart.
There you go. But he had been in retail since his early 20s.
Right.
And then you take John Wooden, man, he was coaching teams for a long time, never won any championship.
27 years before he got a winning team.
And yet in his last 12 years, he won 10 championships in his last 12. Now imagine if he would have hung it up after 25 years.
Right.
Who would even know who John Wooden was? And yet 25 years, that's pretty long term for most people. Most people, we're not even talking 2 to 5 years for most people today. We're talking 2 to 5 phone calls.
Right. And this is a big principle we're teaching here, because most people, remember at the beginning of this talk, we talked about how people want the glittering lifestyle and they're not willing really to work for it. What we're actually saying with the way we behave in Canada and America today is that we want the results without having to put in the time to earn it. We just want to look successful. We don't really want to have to sweat that hard to actually be successful. We just want to look successful. Philosophically, that mindset is broken. On the flip side, though, it's extremely good news what you're saying, Orrin, because if it's true that you can put in time and stay at something long enough to get good at it, then it's under your control. And maybe some people get uncomfortable with that. They don't like hearing the fact that it's under their control because it eliminates excuses for why they haven't succeeded. But yet, if we will just put our hand to the plow and keep it on the plow and stay at it and work deliberately to get better long term, we can become excellent at it and worth will flow. Wealth always finds excellence.
That is so good. That's like that saying that we've been talking a lot about here lately, Chris, is that you either hate losing bad enough to change, or you hate changing bad enough to lose. Your choice.
Right.
And you got to give it time. Even if you hate losing and even if you're changing, you can't change everything in a month to become great. You can't change everything in a year. It's going to take years. You know, John Wooden became the coach he was over years of trial and error, years of experience to become the best. And so you cannot do in a week. If you want tomatoes, it'll take you months. But if you want oak trees, it's going to take you years.
Time is a very significant factor in achievement, significance, impact, wealth, raising children, being healthy. Time is either against you or it's totally for you, depending on the habits that you form in any of those categories. And it's amazing how powerful time is when it's employed along with good habits over time. People underestimate the power of progressive improvement over time.
Right.
They underestimate the power of progressive income over time, the power of compounding interest, which Einstein said was the eighth wonder of the world. People, they want to go for the moonshot. They want the overnight success. They want the something for nothing. They want the instant gratification. And unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, life is not set up that way. It doesn't work that way in any category. You know, Jerry Rice is the NFL's historical most successful wide receiver. He played 303 games. He played as a professional wide receiver, a starting position in the NFL, one of the most brutal jobs you can have in all of athletics, for 20 years. He leads the number of receptions, the number of receiving yards, and the number of receiving touchdowns. He has first place NFL records in all three of those categories. And he's not 5% ahead of second place, which would be amazing. He's not 10% ahead of second place, which would be unheard of. He's over 50% ahead of the next best guy in any of those categories. And you know, the top level of the athletes that make it into the NFL, even to sit on the bench, you know how good those guys are to be at the top? How did he do that? Was he born in a big city and just had a lot of opportunity? Was he the fastest, best athlete? Was he the most gifted guy? No, he was born in some backwater town in Mississippi.
Yep.
He could barely get a scholarship. He barely got drafted. I mean, unbelievable. He wasn't the fastest in the league. He had decent speed at the high school level, just average speed at the college level, and they didn't think he'd make it in the NFL necessarily. But what did he do? You know the story.
Yeah, Jerry Rice is a great example of the principle that in life, we overestimate what can be accomplished in 1 year, and we drastically underestimate what can be done in 10 years. And so here's Jerry Rice. It takes it 20 years, and it's that slight edge, just day after day, a little bit better, a little bit better. I remember a story of one of the rookies coming in when Jerry Rice, this is near the end, last 5 or 6 years of Jerry Rice's career, he has this certain routine. He's so disciplined, and he does this routine preparing in spring training, getting ready for the season. And so this rookie says, well,
6 days a week in the offseason.
Yeah, oh yeah. He said, I'll take it easy on the old man. Yeah, I'll go do your practice. I want to hear, because he'd heard that Jerry had this workout, but he knew, man, I'm in top shape.
I'm 23 years old.
And he said he didn't get halfway through the whole workout, and he is literally laying down, gasping for air, and he can't believe that this man, 15, 20 years older, is just literally taking the field here and charging ahead and doing these exercises and sprints, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the type of discipline, that slight edge over time.
That's right.
Ends up being an incredible difference. You said 50%. So that's like, man, if he's 1%, if he's 2% better over 20 years, that's 40%.
That's right. It's unbelievable. When we talk about going on offense in your income life, when we talk about your personal finances going on offense, these are the principles that you have to follow to get that done. All right. Let's switch to defense. Defense is at least 50%, probably 60, 70%
Defense
into winning championships. Because even if you had all this great offense, even if Jerry Rice had all that going for him, but he was a cocaine addict, he would have, it wouldn't have worked, right? You have to defend against all things that can tear down your offense. So it's true for your personal finances, too. You can do all kinds of correct things to bring in a whole bunch of money. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of studies that show that the highest income earners of job holders, which would be lawyers and doctors, are the worst at accumulating wealth. They have the most potential energy to accumulate wealth because they bring the most in, but they waste the most of it compared to almost anybody else. Oh, by the way, Orrin, you'd find this one interesting. I just read the other day that one of the top professions for accumulating wealth is engineers.
Really?
Engineers and mining engineers, for some reason, are two of the categories that accumulate the most wealth, even though they don't make the most money, as we learned firsthand. So let's talk about defense when it comes to someone's personal finances. What do you think when we talked about defense?
Well, I think, again, we talk about the hole at the bottom of the bucket. What we need to do is we need to seal up that hole. As you were talking about lawyers and doctors, it doesn't matter what they're making if they're spending it and then having compound interest working against you. You know, one of the principles of defense that I always focused on when I first started out in life, and man, I had school loan debt, and I had, I got married, and Laurie and I pooled our poverty, and we had the commercial debt and credit card debt, et cetera, house debt. And I thought, man, every night I go to sleep, I wake up poorer.
Oh, that's amazing.
I wake up poorer than I was when I went to bed. So I'm like, no wonder I'm so stressed out and I'm having to work all over, because I've got all this debt that even though I need to rest, my debt's not resting. It's still accumulating against me. Now, the beautiful thing with that is that we can turn that principle around, that if we can seal off that debt and close it and start just hammering debt. A lot of times people are like, well, I have a 7%, I got to pay on that, but I'm going to go take this money and invest it and make a ton. I'm like, well, if you pay off that debt, you have a guaranteed 100%. 7% return. No questions asked. It can't ever. Every time you wipe out debt, you have a guaranteed return. Whatever interest is working against you, you just wiped out that interest working against you. Can you imagine the first night you go to bed at night and you wake up and you didn't get poorer? And then you keep working and compounding, and eventually you go to bed at night and you wake up wealthier. And you think of the small percent, I don't even know that percent, but I know it's extremely small, of Americans and Canadians that will go to bed tonight and will wake up wealthier than when they went to bed.
It's interesting. I never thought of it this way, but when you said you wake up in the morning and you're poorer than you were when you went to bed because your interest was accumulating and your debt was revolving and killing you, that's like getting robbed during the night.
It is.
Except you opened the door and invited them in so you could have that car in the driveway and that swimming pool in the backyard and that fancy suit. You invited the robbers in.
You said, please come and take a portion of my wealth.
Take more than it's worth because I want it right now.
It's like you say, well, but I needed that $20,000 swimming pool. But then you figure out by the time you actually paid it off because you did it on credit. To me, if you can't pay cash for it, then you can't afford it. But when you say, no, but I can afford the payments, well, what ends up happening is that $20,000 swimming pool, you end up paying $45,000 for it. So if you could look every time you want to buy something and you want to put it on credit, then don't look at the price of it anymore. Just say, are you willing to pay 3 times that amount?
And how much do you pay in stress? And lost health, lost happiness, lost fulfillment, lost feeling of security. And that's $40,000 that you'll never have to spend on a business or to feed the goose that lays lays the golden eggs, it's even more than the 40 grand.
You're eating your seed wheat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because you talk about defense. It's defense that wins championships, but it's probably harder to do, and it's not as exciting. I don't think any of us turn on a football game to see how good the tackles are going to be. We look for the long passes and the exciting, glitzy offense. But defense is extremely important, and it's all about keeping a bigger portion of what you make. Keep a big portion of what you make. Now, there's a really important fact in building wealth, and it's this. Both spouses have to be on board.
In The Millionaire Next Door. That is a great book. It has a chapter that I had Laurie read. I don't know. I think she read it at least 10 times because I told her, I said, honey, I want you to read this because I want to make sure that neither you nor I will go and create so many holes in the bucket that it's all going to drain out. And she read that and she implemented that. And that is such a key point. In fact, they said in that book, Millionaire Next Door, that the number one factor to determine whether the family was a millionaire or not was the wife's spending habits. And that just floored me.
Factor.
That floored me. And I said, well, then I better have Laurie. And to her credit, she read it, and I know the same for Terri, that they are very fiscally responsible.
That's right. There's a lot of ways that we can get off track, and it affects the guys too. We're not just beating up on the wives, but there's a lot of wrong thinking that causes money to be valued less than it should be. We have to value money properly. We certainly don't want to overvalue it and make it the center of our life. But as we talked on another recording, we want to make it our slave, not our master. And there's some things that we have to murder some wrong thoughts in our head about money. And one of them is when you dig into why those wives, in the case of that study that you're citing, why they're wasting money. I remember reading that. The number one thing they said was the wife had the thought in her head that she deserved it. I deserve it. I'm a certain age now, and after working this many years, I deserve to have whatever it might be.
Well, if you look at what money is just a measurement of the service that you provided to society. So if you are saying, well, I make $100,000, well, then that means that society is rated in a free enterprise society. They've said you are worth $100,000. We feel what you're providing to society is worth $100,000. But if you're spending $110,000, then when you say, well, I deserve to have more, I'm like, no, actually, you're $10,000 over already. You have overspent. You have spent $10,000 more in services. You've spent it more than you provided. You're a negative provider into society.
You're taking more than you're giving.
That's right. And the whole principle of compounding wealth is that you take less than you provide over time. So if you're at a position, I don't care where you are, as you're listening to this right now, if I'm way negative, I'm negative this, okay, well then let's stop with this I deserve more, because you've already proven that you deserve less. And that's why you're in this stress, is because it's compounding against you. So one of the first things is confront brutal reality. And if it's a negative, then right now society is measured, and you've been found weighed and measured and tried in the balance and said, hey, you are at a negative position. We've got to figure out how to produce that offense. And then where can we start to cut? Where can we start to trim back on some of the things that we, quote, feel we deserve? And maybe we don't need to drive that new car. Maybe we don't need to drive that new lease car. Maybe we can cut back. Oh, but what will my friends think? I would much rather have my friends think, oh, Orrin, he's going way backwards. And a lot of them did. When I started, I wasn't going to do a lease car, and I drove used cars and all this. It didn't matter, because I knew I was getting myself out of debt. And man, it's so exciting the day you pay off that last credit card, or the day you write your last home payment and you say, man, I own this house free and clear. I own these cars free and clear. So now when you go to bed at night, you have nobody coming in and robbing your house, as you were saying.
That's right. That's right. Another thought we have to kill, or a habit we have to kill, is status. Where people somehow want to demonstrate their self-worth or their sense of importance or something. They have to. It's almost a compensation, I think, that they feel they have to show off how important they are by some of their bling.
What is that? Our society today, they know it all, they show it all, and they owe it all.
Unfortunately, very true. It comes from a mindset of materialism, where we think these things are going to make us happy, and we overconsume and we hyperconsume, and it's just those things. How
can we be happy, though? I mean, how can we be happy having the new car, having this big house, having all these new things, and going to bed knowing that we're going broker, and then you have to run harder and harder on this like gerbil wheel? It seems like they keep speeding it up because you're trying to keep up with people who really aren't going to be impressed at the end of the day anyhow. And so, like, to me, in our material culture today, we just got to get it through our heads. Material things will not make you happy. I don't care. You get in a fight with your wife, go sit in a brand new Cadillac. It's not going to make you happy.
Not only are material things not going to make you happy, that's true even when you can afford them. It's doubly true when you can't afford it. Now you're piling insult on top of injury. Let's say that you go out and buy a new car and you spend 1% of your annual income on the car. You can totally afford it. Yeah, it's nice. It's, it gets you from point A to point B. Maybe you can afford a little bit of luxury. Yeah, we appreciate that. But the car itself does not produce happiness. But if you have to mortgage your life to get, that's even worse.
Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley. They both had plenty of money. And yet they both were terribly unhappy because they found out, which all of us will find out at some point in our life, that material things will not make you happy. But I love your point that even the people who can afford to do it know that it can't make you happy. But when you can't afford it and you do it, not only do you find out it doesn't make you happy, but then you have someone coming into your house and robbing you called interest every night as you go to bed.
That's right. Exactly. Pride, competing with the Joneses. We have to kill these thoughts. Self-indulgence. Sometimes people, they use buying as a way to satiate their real problems in their heart. And so it's almost like a shopper's addiction where they think if I buy this stuff, it'll make me happy and it'll satiate my wounds. But you're not attacking the root cause.
I want to make sure we hit that point where you said, I deserve it. It's real simple to know if you deserve something. Go look in your bank account, and after everything's paid for, if there's enough money that you can pay cash for it, then I guess you deserve it. After you've already had your savings plan, all the other things. And if there's not enough money, then you can say you deserve it, but the facts say differently.
It reminds me of that skit probably a lot of us have seen from Saturday Night Live years ago with Steve Martin. He and his wife are sitting at a table, and this guy comes in to sell a booklet. Here's how to do it. If you don't have the money, don't buy it.
What? Are you sure? No, wait a minute. This is confusing.
See if I get this straight.
You mean if I don't have the money, I can't buy it?
I shouldn't buy it if I don't have the money?
But I deserve it.
Right, exactly. There's another category, addictions, which I talked a little bit about how some people get addicted to shopping, but we've seen all kinds of addictions just ravage people's finances. And the principle here is if you even suspect that you have some kind of an addiction to shopping, spending, gambling, whatever it might be, you need to get help. You need to admit it, look in the mirror, and go get some professional help quickly. Another thought that we have to murder is immediate gratification, that we just have to have it now, that they're just on sale. It's the best time ever. I mean, it's zero money down. It's no % interest. Why wouldn't it be a good idea to get it on payments? All these different things we convince ourselves of that we just have to have it now. It's just the right time. If we don't buy it, somebody else is going to get it. It's the last red one they have on the lot.
On this point, I think this is why it's so important that the husband and the wife, if you're married, are on the same page. Because if one person, let's say that the wife is practicing delayed gratification and they're not out there spending, but then the husband's coming home with a new rifle or a new truck, then eventually if it's going to be spent anyway, it becomes almost a destruction of the commons. I better spend mine before he spends his. And then it becomes a race of how quickly they can spend. It's almost
kind of like Congress.
I was going to say it becomes almost like the government. But we don't get to print money.
Right. That's right. They lock up normal people for that. That's right. And then there's superficiality and surface level life. And that goes back to what we talked about. The deeper you are and the deeper you're attached to the real principles of life, the less you'll be attached to your money and the trappings of success.
You just, it's like I love the story of Sam Walton driving around in a 73 pickup truck. His biggest thing was that his dogs could jump in the back and he could go take them hunting. And he said, sometimes his favorite dog would be in the front seat. So there was always hair. And he said he'd pick people up and throw them in that seat. They said they'd be in a suit and they'd be getting dog hair. But he just wasn't trying to impress people with his things. I mean, he's the richest man in the world. And it's like the material things wasn't the reason he did it. He did it for that competition, that competitive greatness, as John Wooden would say.
Yeah, it was like he was a professional athlete, and that was his sport. And he didn't do it for the contract. He did it for the accomplishment.
That's it. And making wealth was just the scoreboard. That's it.
That's right. Exactly. Probably one of the last ones is waste. We see people who maybe they don't suffer from all these other indulgences and stuff, but it ends up being waste. They just waste a bunch of money. They'll choose expensive routes when they could have chosen cheaper ones at many, many, many little spots in life. And over time, it adds up. We're staying at a very nice resort right now, and Terri and I arrived last evening. And we're pretty light travelers, and we don't have any children with us on the trip. We just had a couple little bags. But, there were bell caps there that were happy to grab our bags and take them up to room. Well, that would have been a $5 or $10 tip or something. But it's like, I can drag my bag to my own room to save $10. Now, I don't need to save $10, but I'm in a habit of saving $10 because it's $10.
We
it's
did the
principle.
same thing, Chris. We did the exact same thing. I said, man, I've got 3 of our 4 children here. They can each grab a bag, and we only had 3 bags. So I think we got 3 kids, 3 bags. Laurie and I don't even, hey, we already got our own professional bellhops,
That's right.
They live with us.
You deserve it.
That's right.
You've earned it.
We've earned it.
I think what we need to do is we need to get our society more in love with being independent, free, and secure rather than being sexy, glamorous, and glittery.
Real success is when you can wake up and you're making more money that day without the stress, and that you can choose the things that really matter in life, the significant things, not the urgent things. When you can get past the urgent in life, and literally you can start to live your life on the principles, on the key things, the important things of life, not the urgent. So many people are, this phone call, I got to do this. I got to go pay that bill. I'm behind on that. And they're like juggling all of these things, and none of the things they're juggling really matter, but they're just incredibly urgent because they got so involved in the urgent that they forgot the important. But if you can get to the point where you can, because you eliminated that, you eliminated this, you got all the urgent things, now you're down to just a few important things, and that's when you can really start having a significant impact in life. And man, the feeling you have inside because you've gotten rid of all the urgent, just how do I get my next meal, how do I do this, and you're really focused on how can I have an impact and really make a difference in people's lives.
A lot of times people think wealth is something they're going to accomplish someday. And so they get frustrated waiting for it, and they finance it for now or whatever ends up happening. They just have to have it now. But when you apply these principles we've been talking about here this morning, and you get all these things going in your life, you're wealthy already. You're happy on the journey. You're doing the right things for the right reasons. You're being authentic you, who you're built to be. You're providing value. You're doing the right things. You're denying yourself. You're forming good habits. You're wealthy already, my friend. So you can have immediate gratification of the accomplishment feedback of living your life the right way, and then the money will follow.
A debt is like a drug. Some people, they use drugs because they want to feel that sense of happiness or joy, but it's counterfeit. It's like they take it and like, I feel happy, I feel joy for this bit, but then all of a sudden it goes away and it's actually worse. And then I got to get another hit of this counterfeit joy or this counterfeit feeling, and it can literally brings you into bondage. But true happiness, Laurie and I have, been blessed. We look at it, our true wealth is in our relationships.
Amen.
What is a true friend? Someone that stands with you even when you mess up, and will help you and encourage you and will be there in the tough times. What is that really worth in someone's life? Is that worth more than a Cadillac sitting in the driveway? Again, nothing wrong with Cadillac.
Infinitely
but
more.
You sit there and look at what is a loving relationship with your spouse? What's that truly worth? How much pain? I mean, they said divorce is the number one thing, that income eliminator, because it splits up families, it splits up wealth and legal fee, all this stuff. And it's like, man, if you could take that and actually work and develop that relationship, not a perfect relationship, but a working relationship that gets getting better and serving one another. It's like, what is that worth to a family? I mean, they can actually put a physical worth on that, how much it costs for divorce. It's in the billions of dollars in society.
In our societies, that's right.
And so to me, it's like, that's one of the things that I love is that, hey, by going out and serving people and building lifelong relationships, that is the true wealth in your life.
Yeah, it's amazing once you start digging into these issues, how different it ends up being than what you think in the beginning. You think, I'm just going to haul off, make a bunch of money, become rich, and be happy. But the more you scratch that surface, the more you find the true principles underneath. And you realize the good news is you can be happy all the way along.
That's right.
And you can be wealthy starting today if you understand what true wealth is, while you're in the pursuit of long-term, lasting financial independence.
Before you and I ever made really any money, we were both living paycheck to paycheck. So we started having a sense of joy and happiness because we knew we were pursuing what we were meant to pursue, and we were having so much fun. So many things came together before we had the money. Now, yes, we have the money, and that brings its own joys and it brings its own challenges. But the real wealth is still in those relationships that were formed.
That's right. So go out and play some offense and some defense in your life, financially speaking. But if you set it on the types of principles we're talking here, you'll be wealthy already.
You got it.
You've been listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. For more information, please go to financialfitnessinfo.com. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future for you. The information presented in this audio is for general education purposes only and provides information the speakers believe to be accurate on the subject matter covered. It's sold with the understanding that neither the speakers nor the producers are providing advice for any particular portfolio or for any individual's particular situation, or rendering investment advice or other professional services such as legal or accounting advice. If expert assistance in areas that include investment, legal, and accounting advice is needed, please seek a competent professional's services. This audio may make reference to performance data collected over various periods of time. Remember that past results do not guarantee future performance. Performance data, as well as laws and regulations, change over time, which could affect the applicability of the information presented in this audio. Any data presented herein is used merely to illustrate the underlying principles. This audio is not to serve as the basis for any financial decision or as a recommendation of any specific investment. No warranty is made with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. And both the speakers and producers specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this audio. You're listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. This CD was selected to help you build your income, get out of debt, and prosper in any economy. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future. New York Times best-selling author Orrin Woodward holds 4 U.S. patents, has been named one of Inc. magazine's top 50 leadership and management experts, and is a Guinness World Record holder.
You know, a lot of people have been asking, how many have heard of the financial matrix? Probably been hearing a little bit about that, right? Well, I want to unpack the financial matrix tonight. I want to go a little bit deeper. I want to help you understand a little bit inside, kind of like tearing apart the onion, and let's dig a little bit deeper into this money system and help you understand how money is created, help you understand why it's important that you understand the financial matrix so that you can protect your family. I think today, most people, although money, I believe, is very important when it comes to body, mind, and spirit, from the body side in the physical world, money's pretty important. How many people think money's pretty important? Well, it must be pretty important because most of us spend 8 to 10 hours a day, every day, trying to make enough money to pay our bills. It's pretty important. And yet, if you ask the average person on the street, what is money? Very few people would really, well, it's something you collect so that you can buy stuff, right? And then if you even went further, like, well, how do they create money? Now we're really going off the charts. Because there's a big difference between commodity money, asset money, or debt money. And when we go back throughout history, we'll see what they call commodity money, gold, silver, things like that. Today, we do not live in a world with commodity money. We live in a world of fiat money, debt money. It's created out of thin air, called money, and then loaned to Americans, loaned to Canadians, who then have to go out and do real work to pay off this fiat money. And a lot of you probably haven't heard much about that. And if you have, it was through independent research, because if you go take an economics, I finished through my sophomore year, I finished half of my MBA program, all of my undergrad, half of my MBA program. I'm not going to mention what school I went to in Ohio. And we took several economics classes and never learned how money was created. And I find it interesting, but I want to take you back through history because In America, it's very interesting how many people actually did understand the difference between commodity money and debt money and were concerned about the citizens of America and the citizens of Canada and spoke out against the debt system because of their fears of how much control it would give to people. What they were doing, they didn't say the word financial matrix, but they clearly understood the concept of control through the use of money. And I want to read to you, I'm just going to read you some of the founding fathers, some of the presidents of the United States, some of their thoughts on the precursor of the financial matrix. Here it is. Let's say the first one. Thomas Jefferson. This was in 1809. There was a big debate over the recharter of the bank bill. And here's what Thomas Jefferson said. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all their property until the children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. This is 1809. Does anybody remember the 2008 credit crisis, where everybody's house immediately lost 50% of its value, and there were how many people walking away from their property and losing it, and the banks? That's inflation, deflation. Thomas Jefferson was describing this, just about 200 years, almost exactly 200 years earlier. He was already predicting that because he understood the difference between asset money, commodity money, and debt money. Let's go further. James Madison, another president of the United States. History records that money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. James Madison. It seems like they were concerned about the source of money. How many people think that you could become a millionaire if you could create money out of thin air? You see, in other words, if we gave you that control, and you could just if you could buy every Monopoly game in the world and call it real money, how many people think you'd be doing pretty good? You might not have to work too hard and you could be doing pretty good. Now, a lot of other people would have to work hard because when you purchase other people's goods, they probably would still had to work for that, right? So James Madison kind of understood it. Let's go a little bit further down the line. Andrew Jackson, here's what he said about debt money. If Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given them to use themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations. Andrew Jackson. So there seems to be some argument going on that why should you give if the state is responsible for money? It was originally responsible to regulate money, but they've surrendered this power to third-party sources where they can create this money, and the presidents of the United States seem to be very concerned about this. Let's go even further. Let's go along to Abraham Lincoln. So we're walking right up the line here. Here's what Abraham Lincoln said about the same issue. The government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credits needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of the consumers. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest. Money will cease to be master and become the servant of humanity. Abraham Lincoln. There's another. Now, did you guys have a class on how concerned? I'm speaking, I go talk to a lot of people, and I start asking. And I'm thinking, I felt I was fairly educated. I knew none of this. And yet we all know that somebody carrying around $1,000 $100 bills is probably doing better than someone carrying a $10 bill. And if you could print this $1,000 $100 bills, and this guy had to work for his 10, you can kind of see there'd be a discrepancy. I'm all for inequality if it's earned. That justice says you reap what you sow in life. That's a biblical concept. But I have a problem if somebody gets to print and create and be able to take real wealth from other people who don't have that same power. That's unjust. and injustice needs to be stood up to. Well, since we're moving along after Abraham Lincoln, let's go to Teddy Roosevelt. Let's see what TR had to say about the power to issue currency out of thin air. Issue of currency should be lodged with the government and be protected from domination by Wall Street. We are opposed to provisions which would place our currency and credit system in private hands. Now today, we just sit there and talk about the Federal Reserve. Isn't that an interesting name? What a misnomer of a name. Federal Reserve. It's not federal, and there are no reserves. And yet it's called the Federal Reserve. Interesting. So that's Teddy Roosevelt. Now, let's go to Woodrow Wilson, who was he was the president that signed the Federal Reserve Act. So he knows that, and later in life, this is several years after he signs the act, shortly after leaving the presidency, this is what he wrote. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Woodrow Wilson. Anybody teach you that in school? It's amazing. When I start studying this, I'm thinking, and I'm going to get into a little bit more detail. So you're going to have to bear with me about the first 10, 15 minutes here, because I really want to sink in that this money system, this financial matrix is real. It's affecting your life right now. And if you don't know, there's a saying, ignorance is bliss. The only reason it's bliss is because you're ignorant of the pain it's causing. But it's still causing pain. This is Franklin Roosevelt. Now this is after it's gone further. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act. This is 1933, so 20 years after the Federal Reserve Act. Here's what Franklin Roosevelt had to say about our money system. And he wrote this to Colonel House in a letter. The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Andrew Jackson, by the way, and I did a talk maybe a year ago now on Andrew Jackson breaking the Second National Bank and ending that. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who supported the banks, he supported many of those positions, but even he admitted that the government has been owned since Andrew Jackson. So even he, indirectly, agrees that Andrew Jackson did free the system for a period of time, but not long term. So here's these presidents saying this. So then I said, well, why don't I go back to the Constitution and see when they created the Constitution, and it's very similar in Canada. The system of money is very similar in both countries as I've been studying it. Here's what the Constitution said. There are only two separate parts of the Constitution where it even mentions money. Section 8, here's what it says. It permits Congress to coin money and to regulate its value. That's it. When it comes to money, Congress is allowed to coin money and regulate its value. In other words, they were hard money people. They understood to create gold, silver, to create a real asset, something that even if the state were to disappear, the gold would still have value. In other words, the value of the money wasn't because the state said it was so, it was because it was a commodity. Gold has value even if you weren't in the United States, right? Gold would have value anywhere. It has for throughout the ages. So that's Section 8. Section 10 is the other one, and this one, it denies the individual states the right to coin or print their own money because they had big issues during the colonial time of individual states printing money not backed by anything, and it would cause all kinds of inflation before it would collapse. So the government actually said, don't print paper money. That's too dangerous. Coin money and regulate its value. That was the assignment by our Constitution. What happened? How far are we removed from that time? Well, let me tell you what happened. I'm going to read you one extra part of the Constitution and then tie this together. Here's this extra part. Congress shall have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. Necessary and proper clause. Remember that. Necessary and proper clause. When the Constitution was created in 1787, it was ratified. There was a big argument. There was a massive dispute before the ratification. During the actual Constitutional Convention and during the ratification of each individual state, and the big argument was over the necessary and proper clause. They said, Patrick Henry stood up once and he said, necessary and proper? Why, you could argue anything could be necessary and proper. I mean, you've enumerated these 28 powers or whatever it was. You've enumerated these powers that the government can do this and this only. If you allow them to do anything you want, then why don't you just make a constitution that says this? The state will do whatever it wants to do. Do you know what? 2 years, 1789, they instituted a bank that started printing paper money. 2 years, our Constitution stood on its foundation. And after 2 years, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson got into a huge debate. And the debate was around this necessary and proper clause. And Alexander Hamilton was for. He said the necessary and proper clause means that we should be able to do whatever we need to do, and we're going to need a bank to print paper money because it's a lot easier to do that than have to work and collect gold. If we can print paper money, we can control the people a lot more. Do you understand that the government, through its through these banks, can print paper that they could actually run the country without taxing you at all? Because they can just print as much money as they need. And through the power of printing money, they can take what you produced. Because they can hire people to do all kinds of projects for the state and no longer for society. The necessary and proper clause was very dangerous. Let me take you back just a little bit further. During the Constitutional Convention itself, there were two interesting votes that very few people hear of. Let me read it. The delegates at the Constitutional Convention rejected a clause that would have given Congress the authority to issue paper money. They actually asked for it. A person at the convention said, can we put in a clause that says the Constitution, the state has a right, the federal government has the right to print paper money? And guess what they did? No way! Why did they refuse the right to print paper money? Because they knew if they could print paper money not backed by gold, it would cause inflation and deflation cycles and destroy the wealth of the people. So they refused it. So guess what? When they voted that down, they thought, okay, now let's actually go even a step further and put it right into the Constitution that they can never do that. They also rejected a measure that would have specifically denied the ability to the federal government to do so. So they did two things. They defeated the votes giving them the power to print money, but then they also defeated having it said that you could never do it. One thing about law, I have a very good lawyer. And I talk to him a lot. I bounce stuff by him. And he told me something very interesting. He said, you know what a good lawyer does? A good lawyer focuses on the details and captures in the contract everything that's agreed upon so that people don't have to have a good memory. It's in the contract. If the contract is nebulous, there's danger. Because now, well, what did we agree to? Well, I think we agreed to this. Well, I think we agreed to this. Don't you find it interesting that they left something nebulous as important as the money system? One group, there were two groups in that Constitution Convention. One of them had seen the bad effects of printing paper money. And so when they said Congress should have the authority to print paper money, they said no, and they voted that down. So then this group said, well, let's put it right in there saying Congress can never have the power to do it. And this group said no, and they voted it down. So they kept it nebulous. What does nebulous do when you tie it in with the necessary and proper clause? 2 years. 2 years of nebulousness. I hope that's a word. And the American people were on their way to losing their freedoms. And it wasn't just America, because you can track the same thing in Europe. You can track the same thing in Canada. The 10th Amendment was actually spelled out. Remember, the original Constitution did not have those original Bill of Rights, the 10 Amendments. The first 10 amendments were called the Bill of Rights. And the 10th Amendment, here it says, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. So here's what it's saying. All those enumerated powers, anything that wasn't specifically enumerated, is reserved for the states. So you would think that should have protected us from the necessary and proper. Oh no. 2 years, and we lost it. And you hear, well, what did these banks do? I mean, Orrin, what was the danger of having one of these banks? Here is the banking system in a nutshell. You've got the Treasury. This is the U.S. Treasury. And you've got this banking system, all of these banks that use what we call fractional reserve banking. And here's how your money is created today. It's not gold. It's not silver. It's when the Treasury needs more money, and our federal government, how often does it need more money? Pretty much on a daily basis. So it says, I need more money. But they've taxed the people up to the limit. They can't just go and double our taxes because they're afraid that we would protest that too much. So they go to these fractional reserve banks and say, can we borrow some money? And they're like, sure. And then they go to their computers and they digitize some more money and they hand it to our government. You say, but how can they just digitize money? Don't they have to have money in their vault in order to do that? No, they don't have that. So what they did is they created this thing called the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, when the banks have loaned out their money and they have fractional reserve banking, it works like this. The Federal Reserve writes a check and says, I'll buy some treasury bills from you, bank, and I'll buy 100 million in treasury bills from you. And they write a check for 100 million. Do you know where that money comes from when they write that 100 million check? It's created literally out of thin air. They sat down, they said, Mariner Eccles, and they asked him, they said, so where does this money come from? Just buy the credit for the country. It's just basically, here it is, it's 100 million, the check's in the mail, you can count on it. This $100 million goes to a bank and they buy these treasury bills. So what you see is treasury bills go to the Federal Reserve. They write a check for $100 million to one of these big banks. This bank has $100 million. The government says, can I borrow some money? What a coincidence. I've got $100 million sitting here. Now you'd think it'd be bad enough if they just handed them the $100 million because they created it out of thin air and handed it to them, but it's way worse than that. Fractional reserve banking allows you to 10 times how much you loan out. If you have $100 million, you can loan out $1 billion. Can you imagine? So I got $100 million sitting here and say, if I had $100 million and you came to me and said, can I borrow 10 million? Sure, here's 10 million. I loaned 10 people 10 million. There's my 100 million, right? Wrong. I can keep loaning. I can loan 10 times that much money out because fractional reserve banking. So the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air, hands it to the fractional reserve bank. Then the fractional reserve bank can 10 times the value of whatever money they have on credit to the Federal Reserve. And so it's an endless game where when the banks need more money to loan to the federal government, the Federal Reserve buys treasury bills from the banks. The banks then take that money and multiply it 10 times. They loan some to the federal government. So if they got 100 million and the federal government needed 100 million goes to the federal government. They get treasury bills. But now they use those treasury bills, and from that they start fractional reserve banking. Do you need a mortgage? Of course you need a mortgage. You want to live in a house. Haven't you seen the federal government get very concerned about everybody should have the right to own a house? You've heard that, right? You don't have any money? No problem. You qualify anyway. And so when they do that, what's happening is that 100 million, they loan the 100 million to the government, but now they still can keep loaning 100 millions because they can, through the banking system as it bounces around, I'm kind of doing a very shortened version here, but through the system of loaning a mortgage here, and then that person puts their money in this bank, and then that bank fractional reserves it again, It goes from 100 million, ends up turning into $1 billion. That is exploding our money supply. Exploding it. You say, well, how bad is it exploding it, Orrin? Let me explain. Let me show you fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking is one of the most phenomenal, amazingly fraudulent things I've ever studied. Because it works like this. If you earned $1 million and saved $1 million, and one of your friends wanted to loan money, you could loan him the money out of the $1 million you have. If 10 of your friends came to you and asked for $1 million loan, you can't loan all 10 of your friends $1 million, can you? Through the miracles of banking, the banks can do just that. The banks can actually loan more money than they have. We, as a group, if we took all of our money and put it into one of the banks, let's say that all of us together put $5 million in a bank. When we go get a mortgage, don't we think that we're just borrowing some of that $5 million that the whole community put in there? You're not imagining at all that $5 million is turning into $50 million, are you? But that's exactly what happens. Put in your $100. With the 10% reserve, that $100 turns into $1,000. This explosion in the money supply, as the Federal Reserve creates free money, hands it to the banks, buys treasuries back, the banks loan it to the federal government, so they're happy because the federal government just wants to have money without having to tax us. They're happy. Why does the bank love it? Because they loan it to the federal government. They know they're going to get that back. By the way, do you know how they get paid their interest back? On your tax dollars. How many people have noticed their taxes going up? Let me explain how bad it is. This last year, you paid just under $250 billion to service the national debt. 250, do you understand how much money 250? That didn't pay anything off. That just serviced the national debt. Do you know what that national debt is actually? It's printed paper money. Can you imagine how wealthy you can be if you get paid interest on paper? I guarantee you, when I first heard that, I said, that ain't right. I'll have to do some research. I've researched it now for over 5 years. It's right. What I'm telling you is, the government wanted so bad to be able to make money without having to raise taxes, so it wins in the deal. The banks win because they get to charge interest without having to store gold or have anything of real value. The only people who lose is everybody who has to work for a living that ends up having to pay higher taxes and services debt. When you get this mortgage, although they printed the money out of thin air, do you get to print money back in thin air and hand it back to them? That would be at least more fair, wouldn't it? You know, you print, I print. I'll stay up later, print more, you know. No, that's not the way it works. They print fool's gold, and then you have to do the wealth of a country. If we really believe that wealth is paper, then why wouldn't everybody just go and say, well, we're never going to produce another item. We're just going to print paper. We'll beat China. We'll print more paper than them. The wealth is not paper. The wealth is in production. All money does is it's an index that tracks the values of different things of production that you're doing. And yet what we've got in our head is print more paper, and that's creating wealth. And so we're becoming such an inflationary society, and the rest of the world eventually not going to keep playing this game with us. So watch this. This fractional reserve banking, this 10 times effect. Let me show you how bad this is killing us. Now, I'm not going to get into the M1, M2, M3 in detail. I'll just tell you that there's 3 forms of measurement that they used to report. Up through 2006, the government at least reported how much inflation they were doing. M1 was just the standard absolute liquid cash. M2 was liquid cash plus some institutional, plus deposit savings. M3 was the big one. M3 was the one that you really wanted to track because it showed just the effects of inflation and the fractional reserve compounding. And up through 2006, they tracked it. And in 2006, the federal government announced they were no longer going to report the M3 number. I wonder why. Let me tell you one other part before I show you this graph. 1971 was a key date for your freedom. Some of you are like, I wasn't even born in 71. It was still a key date. In 1971, Richard Nixon did something that you very rarely hear about. You hear about Watergate all day long, but you don't hear about this. You don't hear that in 1971, Richard Nixon was attempting to finance the Vietnam War and finance all these programs at home, giveaway programs at home, and they were printing more paper than they could back in dollars. And although the United States was off the gold standard locally in the country, they were not off the gold standard compared to other countries. If they printed too much paper, the goods in our country would go so high that some of our dollars would be bought. We'd use all these excess dollars and buy stuff overseas. And so other countries would get these big trade deficits. The United States would get a big trade deficit, and then they'd bring all this cash back to the U.S. and say, we don't want any of your goods, so we just want gold for this. And they'd hand millions of dollars, and they'd get gold. And all of a sudden, gold was going out of the United States like crazy, to the point that they could no longer do it after 1971. So they had two choices in 1971. You either stop printing paper money and get serious about only having your money backed by gold again, or you go off the gold standard entirely. And the Bretton Woods Agreement, it was a whole system that started right after World War II. In 1971, Richard Nixon took the dollar off of the international gold standard. So now you could print paper indefinitely, and there's no check on the ability of inflation. Based upon this, I would predict after 1971, we see an explosion in inflation. Anybody want to see the real data and see what happened? See, because you know you have a good theory if what you predict to happen and what happens lined up. That's when you know that you start saying, every idea has consequences. Ideas have consequences. So when you start understanding the theory and you say, they're doing this idea, they're acting on that, this is the consequence. Let's see what Richard Nixon, which again, you don't hear much about this, but in my opinion, this was the biggest mistake in American monetary policy ever. 1960, 1965. This is M3 money. This is all of it. 1970. Can you see this? This is 1970 right there. You see how small this is? This is trillions of dollars. It's not even 0.1. It's like 0.1 trillion total money supply as long as they were checked by the gold standard in last year. You can't just print money because eventually other countries will hold you accountable and come back with this paper and say, give me gold. Paper money was all it was supposed to be, is an acknowledgement that there was so much gold sitting over here for this paper. And at any time you could turn that paper in for gold. That kept people honest because you wouldn't print too much paper because somebody would eventually come and say, I want my gold back. This paper is just for convenience. We found it a lot easier to carry a few hundreds in your wallet than carry a few piles of gold, right? Gets a little heavy. 1971, right there. What has happened to the money supply? Do you realize what this is? This is taking your value. You say, oh no, my house has gone up in value since then. No, your house didn't go up in value. It's just more dollars to pay for. This is the biggest loss of value for citizens. This is trillions of dollars stolen from you, stolen from me, stolen from other Americans and Canadians and everybody around the world. Because when they took the U.S., took itself off of the international gold standard, it took all countries off the gold standard. Because everything was based on the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar was the only one that had to be honest. And if that one was honest, since everybody was trading in dollars internationally, all of them had to be honest. When the U.S. took it off, we became a totally, around the world, every civilized country is running a dishonest system where they can print paper and call it gold, and you lose value. You say, well, Orrin, I see this chart. It's obviously pretty big. Now, why do you think they stopped printing it? Why do you think they stopped? This is 2006, by the way. This is the peak. This is 2006. Notice how this is still going. They still report M2. M2 is still going up. This is still going up. They're just not reporting it anymore. Because this is the idea. It's the ostrich principle. If it's looking so bad, just stick your head in the sand. If you don't report the number, nobody will ask you about it. And the sad thing is, most of us, how many people had no idea any of that? Right? Isn't it crazy? When the American Psychology Association says 76% of Americans go to bed, they lose sleep at least once a month, concerned about money, and yet nobody knows the history of money. Nobody even understands how it works. It's what you call the dumbing down syndrome, that they aren't going to educate you in school. Why aren't they educating you in school? Who pays for that school system again? The federal government pours so much money into schools. Do you think they're going to want to educate you on the truth about what they're doing to money? No way. Now, I don't want to sound terribly negative because there are answers. But you've got to understand the pain before you're willing to go through the work to get the gain. And the pain is so obvious. Let me show it this in a different way. Let me show it through actual cost of inflation. This is cumulative inflation starting 1910, 1920, 1930. So if you started from the Federal Reserve starting in 1913, there it is. So that's baseline 0. 1920, it went up a little. 1930, 1940, 50, it starts going up. Here's 50, 60, 70. You see it going up? That's when we were losing all that gold because we're printing more paper than we had gold backings. And so other countries are going. Finally, right here, Nixon had enough. He said, we can't keep doing this. We're going to lose all our gold supply. And he goes to Arthur Burns, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve at the time. He says, what do you think about us taking us off the gold standard entirely, just ending the Bretton Woods Agreement? We'll just print paper whenever we need it. Through negotiation, okay, we'll do it. Look at the inflation percentage. Up here, this is 22.89. This is 2,289% inflation. What that means is, what was worth $1 in 1913 is now that same dollar. If your grandfather or great-grandfather would have handed you that dollar, today he just handed you 4 cents. You lost 96 cents on the dollars that he had earned and saved to give. As the Bible says, you build up wealth for the next generation. But somebody's robbing it from you all the time. Inflation is a hidden tax. It's robbing from you. This inflation is going crazy. Why is it going crazy? Because there's no gold standard to check it anymore. So what do? Here's what we can do. The first thing is to recognize it's the financial matrix. I just opened up, and in 50 minutes, come on. I could go all day and explain different aspects of what they're doing. All I'm saying is, I'm not for Occupy Wall Street. I'm not for let's go over there and protest. I'm not for getting together and drinking a whole bunch of tea and protesting. You know what I'm for? Non-involvement. Do you know how they broke slavery? Enough people finally got together and just said, in Europe's civilization, slavery was the accepted method. The Romans would conquer a territory and they'd grab a whole bunch of slaves and sell them, and they made a lot of their money that way, and they'd enslave all these people. But through the Christian influence, eventually it became unacceptable to enslave your fellow brothers and sisters. And the system fell through non-involvement. And you go take a look at serfdom and feudalism in the Middle Ages. How did it eventually fall? Because the serfs started escaping to the city, and no longer, they refused to stay on the land. I don't need to live on your land to make it. I can go to the city, and through being a baker, a butcher, or a candlestick maker, I can make my living, and I do not need to participate in your feudal matrix. The financial matrix is the same way. What if we disciplined ourselves? It isn't going to take 100% of the people. It won't even take 50% of the people. Do you realize if 10% of the people stop playing the game, here's what happens, guys. You got the Federal Reserve here. Imagine this like accordions. And the Federal Reserve blows up through the fractional reserve system. Here's the big banks. They can expand this money supply 10 times through knowing that people are foolish enough to borrow all the money that they offer. In the United States, the reason why they constantly keep offering no cash down, same as cash this, they constantly are they're always fighting to get you to borrow money because they can't increase the money supply without your cooperation. They literally rely on you being foolish enough to buy their fool's gold. And they know that you're going to be seduced by the trinkets that they offer you. What if a group of men and women learned to use the word no? Watch this. Watch this. If just 20% of us learn to say no, by cutting this 20%, because it's a 10 times effect here, by cutting 20% of the people playing the game here, it would knock out the money supply itself by a 10 times factor. If we reduced our debt by $1 million, we'd reduce their profits by 10 million. Because it's 10 to 1. Are you following? So, I know, call me crazy. In Japan right now, the central bank of Japan is printing money so much, they can't even believe it. They said, Japan should be in hyperinflation. The central bank is producing 10 times more money than even the Federal Reserve. How come it's not in massive hyperinflation? Because Japan is such an old society now. They didn't have the baby boom like we did. They didn't have the explosion in numbers. The civilization is getting so old, and it's only like a 1.2 birth rate over there, that nobody even has the money. When you start going in retirement age, you're not buying big houses. They're backing out. They're selling stuff and reducing. So they're doing it through distress, but they've reduced the amount that they're borrowing from the system. And so the system has collapsed so far that it doesn't matter how much money the Federal Reserve gives, because they can't expand it because nobody there is borrowing any money. They're doing it from distress because there's nobody that even needs any money. And their economy is in a mess. What I'm saying is, if you can learn to say no to the good and learn to start earning before purchasing. It's a simple concept, but you say, Orrin, I just need to know, when can I buy this? If you have the money, buy it. If you don't have the money, don't buy it. Slow down, Orrin. This is so confusing. What if I have a credit card? If you don't have the money, don't buy it. If you do that, listen, you will not only get yourself out of the financial matrix, but you will, through your non-participation, eventually teach the banks that we're no longer going to be played for fools. The physical matrix fell because of non-participation. The feudal matrix fell because of non-participation. The financial matrix will fall from non-participation. Will you play your part? That's the question. Let me wrap up. Let me just wrap up with just a couple quotes here. William Patterson was the founder of the first ever national centralized bank. Late 1600s, Bank of England. Here's what he said. He was so excited because he was the genius that created the central bank concept that now is all around the civilized world. And he was bragging to a friend in a letter. Here's what he wrote. The bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. Pretty fired up. This is Leo Tolstoy as he studied it. Pretty sharp guy. Here's what he said as he studied it for this latter half of his life. Money is a new form of slavery and distinguishable from the old simply by the fact that it's impersonal, that there is no human relation between master and slave. Henry Ford, during the Depression, was in need of money as things had been reduced and there was a lot of trouble. He went to the big bankers to ask for a loan, and they were like, oh yeah, we're going to be able to take Ford Motor Company from Henry Ford just like we were able to take General Motors from Billy Durant. This is awesome. So they set out their terms, and he couldn't believe the amount of interest that they were asking. as he studied what this banking system was about, this is what he came back and said. It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and money system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford. By the way, he saved his company. He went to his Ford dealers and told them about his financial. He says, I produced all this. I will give you this. He said, but I need a loan from you in order to protect my company so it won't be taken over from the banks. And all of his dealer network loaned him money, and he saved his company. Nicholas Trist, secretary to President Andrew Jackson, this is what he said about the Second National Bank, again, a central bank. Independent of its misdeeds, because the Second National Bank did some things wrong, but he said, independent of that, the mere power, the bare existence of such a power is a thing irreconcilable with the nature and spirit of our institutions. He's basically saying we cannot be free if we give the control of money to enslave us. My last quote that I want to leave you with, as you think about your involvement in the financial matrix and what are you going to do to protect your family. This is from one of my favorite guys. I put him in Resolved. His name's Buckminster Fuller. Anybody remember that story from Resolved? Listen to what now, sharp guy. And he would just do independent research on things. And finally he decided to do independent research. He said, I'm going to know it for myself. And he started studying the money system, very similar as I did 5 years ago. And here's what he said. I'm going to leave you with this. To expose a $15 trillion ripoff of the American people, this is about 15 years ago, it's about 30 trillion now. To expose a $15 trillion ripoff of the American people by the stockholders of the 1,000 largest corporations over the last 100 years will be a tall order of business. Buckminster Fuller.
You've been listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. For more information, please go to financialfitnessinfo.com. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future for you. The information presented in this audio is for general education purposes only and provides information the speakers believe to be accurate on the subject matter covered. It's sold with the understanding that neither the speakers nor the producers are providing advice for any particular portfolio or for any individual's particular situation, or rendering investment advice or other professional services such as legal or accounting advice. If expert assistance in areas that include investment, legal, and accounting advice is needed, please seek a competent professional's services. This audio may make reference to performance data collected over various periods of time. Remember that past results do not guarantee future performance. Performance data, as well as laws and regulations, change over time, which could affect the applicability of the information presented in this audio. Any data presented herein is used merely to illustrate the underlying principles. This audio is not to serve as the basis for any financial decision or as a recommendation of any specific investment. No warranty is made with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. And both the speakers and producers specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this audio. You've been listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. For more information, please go to financialfitnessinfo.com. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future for you. The information presented in this audio is for general education purposes only and provides information the speakers believe to be accurate on the subject matter covered. It's sold with the understanding that neither the speakers nor the producers are providing advice for any particular portfolio or for any individual's particular situation, or rendering investment advice or other professional services such as legal or accounting advice. If expert assistance in areas that include investment, legal, and accounting advice is needed, please seek a competent professional's services. This audio may make reference to performance data collected over various periods of time. Remember that past results do not guarantee future performance. Performance data, as well as laws and regulations, change over time, which could affect the applicability of the information presented in this audio. Any data presented herein is used merely to illustrate the underlying principles. This audio is not to serve as the basis for any financial decision or as a recommendation of any specific investment. No warranty is made with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. And both the speakers and producers specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this audio. You're listening to the Financial Fitness Audio Series. This CD was selected to help you build your income, get out of debt, and prosper in any economy. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future. Chris Brady is a New York Times best-selling author, one of Inc. magazine's top 50 leadership and management experts, and is one of the top 100 authors to follow on Twitter.
Good stuff. Excellent. I'm going to tell you a story, and you may or may not follow why this matters until toward the end. But I'm going to encourage you to have patience with me because this is really important on several levels. Because, as I said earlier, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you still have to learn. But the more you learn how much that what you knew before wasn't really right. One of our former presidents said it's not that they don't know, it's they know so much that ain't so. And the more I've learned, the more I've realized that there's so much that I thought I knew that wasn't even true. And it reminds me of some point in my education somewhere, my formal education, either high school or college or something. I was in a chemistry or a physics class. I don't know where they teach this. But when they teach you what color is, when you're little, it's easy. This is green, little Chrissy, and this is red, and this is yellow, and you memorize, and then you associate, and that's good. I know my colors. And then somewhere later, you find out that it's not really like that. This shirt really isn't blue. This shirt just reflects the wavelengths of light that appear to your eye to be blue, and it absorbs all the other wavelengths. So the color doesn't really stick to this shirt. It's just the wavelengths that are reflected from this shirt that make you think that it's blue. The color you memorized as a little kid, you associate it being blue. Now that's whacked out. I'll never forget that day in school. I stopped flirting. I stopped daydreaming. I was just like, man, it just changed everything. It was like finding out about the tooth fairy or something, you know? Doesn't it just make you look at things different? It's like, that's not really a black blouse she's wearing. That one reflects the most. You know what I'm talking about? Just it changes how you see everything. What I'm going to go through, as I've learned this over the years, and hopefully as we go through this little story tonight, it's going to do that to you, I think. And it's really important that you have the foundation I'm talking about here. And you'll see more of what I'm talking about as we go in a minute. Real quickly, let me give you the history of money. Money is just something that people in general agree on as it being money. Way back, whenever the ancient times were, it could be shells or wampum or all kinds of crazy things have been used as money. Sheep and different crazy things have been used as money. But over time, it kind of started being gold and silver and some precious metals because it was hard to find. It didn't rust. It wasn't good for anything else. They didn't even think of filling teeth with it back then. Probably didn't have too many teeth. And it kind of gravitated to being gold and sometimes silver, but mostly gold down through the ages. And there are people that think that God created that element on the periodic table to be money for mankind. It worked as money for mankind for, since about 6,000 years ago, all the way up to about 1971. It worked just fine in different various forms. And back in those days, you'd go to a town, you'd be traveling, maybe whatever, and you'd carry a little bit of gold around in a purse, and you'd clip off parts of the gold or whatever, paying little bits, and they'd weigh it out, and there's just different ways of doing it. But you didn't want to walk around with your gold on you because someone could whack you on the head and take your gold, right? And head whacking was pretty common in the old days. So you'd leave your gold with a goldsmith. And he'd watch it for you. And if you needed something, you'd swing by and grab a little bit and take it over to the hotel, wherever you're staying. And after a while, the goldsmith would he'd hand you a little slip of paper that showed that you left it with him, and at the end, you go back and turn in your slip, get your gold back. Well, after a while, you could just trade the gold slip to somebody because he knew the goldsmith too, and he could just go over there and redeem it anytime. So after a while, people just had slips of paper representing the gold that they left with the goldsmith. And it didn't take too long. People always figure out angles. It didn't take too long for a goldsmith to realize he could probably issue more slips than he has gold. Because no one ever showed up and wanted all their gold at the same time, as long as not enough people did. He only had to have a fraction of the gold sitting back there for all the slips out there circulating. They call that fractional reserve banking. It's what's done now legally all over the place. Well, then it wasn't very long. Genghis Khan was the first one that thought of it. He said, well, I got a big army. I kill people just like that. They're all scared of me. I'm just going to print up money, put a special stamp on it, give it some really cool color, and say it's money. And if anybody doesn't take it as money, I'll kill them. Which was a very effective approach. And when Marco Polo made his famous journey into the Orient, he came back reporting out about this Khan and how he had perpetuated a Khan. I don't know why they have the same sound. They're spelled differently, but maybe that's the origin of the word. And then a guy named John Law ends up in France in 1715 to 1720, and he does the same thing. And they call this, it's a French word, fiat money system. Fiat means because we said so, because the government gave a fiat and said it's money. And John Law had this whole big thing going with it, and he became the wealthiest man in the world in a matter of years because he helped the French government come up with this money and say, it's money. Some of you are already seeing parallels here. And what happened was people went nuts. And then John Law got involved in this company with this land in the New World called Mississippi. And so people started buying shares with money that the French government said was money. It was only money because they said it was money. They didn't even have to threaten people to kill them. They just, okay, it's great, it's money. And it was so easy to get your hands on. They could buy so much with it so quick. They didn't need the death threat that Genghis Khan had to do. Man, it's great, we can buy stuff. And John Law starts floating shares for this company of this Mississippi land over in the New World that no one had ever seen. And after a while, those shares of that company went up in value more and more and more and more. And you could buy a share on Tuesday for so many of this paper money, and on Wednesday you could sell it for twice as much. It was wonderful. No one was working anymore. They're all speculating in these shares and playing with this paper money, and it formed what was called a bubble. And then one day the bubble popped. All of a sudden the shares were worth nothing. There was so much of this paper money around. All of a sudden everybody was broke. John Law got ran out of town with his tail between his legs, and I think he joined Congress after that. But see, this is the history of booms and busts. Because of this type of shenanigans with money, there are things called booms, when all the stuff goes up in a mad passion of a riotous mob. And there are things called busts, with a bunch of crying in the beer and blaming other people and electing the wrong folks. The technical terms that economists choose to describe booms and busts are inflation and deflation. Now, inflation is when more money is printed than actual value backing the money. Inflation means an inflation of, a growing of, the money supply. Now, we can get really detailed. It's actually more complicated than that because it's a growing of the money supply relative to the demand. It's not just when you produce more money. It's not necessarily automatically inflation, but we'll leave that to the side for now. Just know there's a little bit more to it. But basically, it's an expansion of the money supply beyond what it should be. As a result of inflation, prices go up. Some people think inflation is rising prices. That's not true. Huge demand can make prices go up. That's not inflation. Inflation is when the money supply gets too large and therefore everything costs more because now you have more money fighting for the same amount of goods. And if you're a smart salesperson of goods, if there's a whole bunch more money fighting for the same goods, what do? You raise prices because they're going to pay it, right? I sold a piece of property the other day. I wrote the property tax check, sent it down there. I thought, this is so stupid. The real estate market is dead, and it's going to be dead for a long time. I'm sick of holding on to these lots and paying this property tax. I'm selling them. I called my real estate agent. I gave her some ridiculous price. I said, just move it. We got an offer the first day. I laughed. Ha! Don't insult me. Too low. 2 more came in the other day, and because one of them had already come in, the second offer, they knew another one came in, but of course my agent didn't tell them what the amount was, so they offered me more than my asking price. Isn't this cool? Now that's demand, isn't it? I priced it below the market, 3 offers in a couple days. Fantastic, right? So supply and demand. But when you mess with the money supply, everybody has more money. That's inflation. Now it does some things. One of the things is it taxes people who save money. If you are saving money and you've got money in a bank or you've got some stuck in your mattress and you're saving money, because someone pumps in a whole bunch of fake money around that money, if all the prices go up, it effectively makes your savings worth less. After a while, Americans figure this out and they stop saving like we did, didn't we? Everybody stopped saving. Well, man, we're losing our purchasing power. Hurry up, spend it quick. Part of the reason. The other thing is it's really a hidden tax. It's a hidden tax, and it's a flat tax. You know, we're having such a hard time getting a flat tax passed in our nation. It sounds really fair, doesn't it? Everybody pays 17%. Like, doesn't that sound fair? Because if you don't make much, it ain't much. And if you do make a lot, it's a lot. And it sounds fair. We can't even get that through because envy and all these other reasons. But inflation is not even really a flat tax. It's a reverse graduated tax because it hurts the little guy the worst. And it's secret. Most people don't realize the government does it on purpose. They know darn well what they're doing, and they don't realize it's killing them. They don't understand why they're not getting ahead. Anyway, so that's what happens because of inflation. Prices go up. The value of the dollar goes down. Our nation can export products better, if that's true. Overseas, you know, their money buys more of our products. And if you're massively in debt, here's the reason the government does this. If you're massively in debt, later on when you have to pay it off, the money you're paying it off isn't as valuable, but the number is the same. So that number of debt you owe is the same, but you get to pay it off with money that's worth a lot less later. That's the reason the government does it. When you have the kind of debts that they carry, you'd really like to pay off those debts later with less money, even though they'll have a bigger number on it. So they do it on purpose, so they can pay off their debts later. Now, what's deflation? Deflation is the boogeyman if you talk to government economists. It's the opposite of all this. Deflation is when the money supply shrinks relative to demand, and therefore all the prices go down because no one has money. They can't afford that stuff. It's what I had to do with that lot in Florida. No one was buying it at the price I had it for sale at because it wasn't a good trade for them. All the high dollar buyers were gone, long since left the market. And so I had to keep lowering the price until I found where the market was, and then somebody scarfed it up. That's deflation. Well, it is deflation because there's been so many bankruptcies. There's been so much jobs exported out of our country that there's less money that people have in their hands to spend. So the money supply in that case would shrink, because if you default on a house and you owed $100,000 on it, and now it's only worth $50,000, where'd that other 50 go? Where'd it go? It used to be worth $100,000. Now it's only worth 50. You go bankrupt, they kick you out of the house. Now there's a house on the market for $50,000. Where'd that other 50 go? It disappeared. It's gone. The money supply just shrunk by $50,000 on that market going backwards like that. So that's what deflation is. It's the money supply gets smaller, prices come down. Now, isn't prices coming down a good thing in some instances? It's not if you bought a lot of things speculating, hoping they went up, but it is if you're trying to buy bread. Economize, it's kind of good when prices come down. Didn't we like it when oil prices came back down? You guys follow me, or you asleep? All right, that's deflation. So inflation is more money out there. It makes all the money worth less. Deflation is less money out there. Makes all the money worth more. It can buy more, same amount. All right, those things tie into something called the value of the dollar. Now, the value floats around between inflation and deflation because someone's messing with the supply. If we could somehow do it old-fashioned ways with a bunch of gold coins sitting around, no government can mess with that gold, can they? It's a finite supply. It is what it is. You got what you got. They can't just do fiat and say it's worth more or less. It is what it is. And so that's called stable money. But we've got fiat money now. It's not tied to anything. It's money because the government says so, and they mess with the supply, and they throw us into these booms and busts. And we go back and forth all the time. All right, so that's kind of the foundation. Now let's go through a quick history. How did we get here? When the founding fathers of the United States wrote the Constitution, they gave the federal government the power to declare what money would be. And they gave the power only to coin legal tender, to coin money, not to print paper money, but to coin it. See, they had already gone through an experience during the Revolutionary War with paper money backed by nothing. It was called a continental dollar, and it inflated so badly, they printed a whole bunch of it to try to pay the war debts. Wars are very expensive. And defeating England and getting free cost a lot of money that didn't exist in the colonies. And so they printed this fake money and said it was money. And by the end of the war, it wasn't worth anything. Matter of fact, they said it wasn't worth a continental. That phrase is kind of still around. So they had had a real bad experience with fiat money. And when they wrote the Constitution, they said, no more fiat money. Only I wish they'd have put it in there like that. with that sentence, because then at least they'd have to come up with something creative to do to say that they didn't mean it. But they didn't say it that clearly. So then we were on a gold and silver standard, and it was pretty stable. And you'll read sometimes about how there were booms and busts, but if you look at the magnitudes, it's not true. Then we went into the Civil War, another expensive war, and so we start printing paper money again. We inflate the money supply again, because then we can pay our suppliers for the war materials in money that's not as valuable, but the number's the same. So every time the temptation arises when the need's great enough, the government grabs a hold of this concept and they cheat the money supply to pay their bills. So another war comes along, and you'll notice that governments get the most off track when there's an emergency. Recently, we had an official in our current administration say, never waste a good crisis. I mean, at least he was being honest. Like, that slipped out. I can picture him saying it and going, oops. That's what happens during wars. So in the Civil War, same thing. We go to this paper money, and they invented something really cool during the Civil War called income tax. That was a wonderful thing. And they created something else really wonderful along with income tax called the IRS. These are two wonderful things that happened during the Civil War. Only income tax got deemed unconstitutional in the late 1800s, but the IRS lived on. And so we were back to a gold money standard again. Booms and busts stopped. Everything was pretty constant. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that what happened next in 1907 was contrived by the big bankers. They got together and deliberately caused a financial panic, the panic of 1907. There are some economists that point to all kinds of evidence that the big banking interests were behind doing this to scare people into asking the government to do something. And the government did. In 1910, there was a secret meeting at a place called Jekyll Island, Georgia. This is getting to be kind of famous. You hear about this more and more now. And Senator Aldrich was assigned by the United States Senate to try to figure out how to do something about what had happened in 1907 when a few people rushed to the bank and they couldn't get their money out. Like a small percentage of people, but it doesn't matter when you're panicking. The facts don't count, right? You just panic. Don't waste a good crisis. So top bankers and billionaires representing over 25% of the wealth of the entire planet got together in a secret meeting, and they designed something called the Federal Reserve. It's not federal. It has no reserves. It's not owned by the United States. It's a secret banking. Oh, it's not secret anymore. But they established it as a secret banking cartel. Now, the United States had already had bad experiences with what's called a central bank. There was a central bank when the United States started, and its charter ran out during the presidency of James Madison. But when he fought the War of 1812, he allowed another one to get started because, again, he needed to inflate the money supply to pay for his war. And Andrew Jackson, a president later in the 1830s, he waged a personal war to not allow the charter of that second bank of the United States to get restated. And so the bank got killed again. So twice Americans realized the danger of turning over their money control to private banking interest. And twice they fought the battle to shut down a bank. So America didn't want a central bank. They learned their lesson twice. So you couldn't call it a central bank. You had to come up with another name. So they came up with Federal Reserve. And the United States Senator was in charge of the committee to try to figure out how to have a lender of last resort against another panic like 1907. He calls together all his big money buddies, and they come up with a secret cartel. It took them 2 attempts, but by 1913, the Owen Glass Act was passed through Congress, through the House, signed into law by President Wilson. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve was born. We had our third central bank and everything except for name. Curiously, at the same time, now hang with me on this, guys. Curiously, at the same time, in 1913, they passed something called the income tax. Well, I thought a Supreme Court had already deemed it unconstitutional. It's easy to get around that stuff when you want to come up with a way to pay the 6% interest to the bankers of the Federal Reserve who create the money out of nothing to begin with. There has to be a way for them to get their money first. So tax the citizens with a federal income tax. Oh, this is funny too. One congressman tried to filibuster on the floor and tried to stop it because he said he could see a day it would get so out of control, income tax could go as high as 20%. That's what they said. They laughed him out of there. They said he was an extremist. He was an alarmist. He was crazy. It never happened. But yet, within just a handful of years, the upper brackets were already in the 30, 40, 50% range. It's unbelievable. There's a story or a phrase people use to talk about how power creeps. Have you ever heard the term called bracket creep? You know, it's where you define a problem as being between these two brackets and we're going to solve it. And then over time, the mission grows and it gets bigger and bigger. It's just a police action in Indochina. It's not really a war in Vietnam. But those brackets creeped, didn't they? 57,000 American deaths. Well, bracket creep, there's another cute way to describe it. It's called the camel getting his nose under the tent flap. The way government works to steal the freedom of its citizens is it knows it doesn't have to get the whole thing done all at once. It only has to get the door cracked open. If the camel can get his nose under the tent, sooner or later he knows he can get in farther, right? It seems harmless to let the little nose in, but that's exactly what happened in 1913. The camel's nose got tucked under the tent flap. The Federal Reserve was created. The entire money control of the United States government was given to a small cartel of private bankers, and we implemented the income tax so we'd have the money to pay them the interest. There was a third thing that happened that same year. We passed the 17th Amendment, and no longer were senators appointed by state legislatures like the founders wanted them to be to make sure we had a check and balance on what Congress would do. Instead, they passed the 17th Amendment and said, let the masses elect the senators too. And now everybody had to pander to mob opinion. That was the birth of an empire and the death of a republic. How does the Federal Reserve work? This is really cool how they do it. You know, Alan Greenspan, the big hero, the maestro. You know how it really works? They basically sell a bond. The United States says, we need some money, and we'll print up a bond, and then they'll hand it to the Federal Reserve, who will write them a check out of an account that doesn't exist. And then the United States government will put that check on electronic deposit, and the money exists, and the Federal Reserve holds the bond. And every time the Federal Reserve buys bonds from the U.S. government, money flows out, therefore increasing the money supply, causing inflation, and lowering interest rates. So when you hear that Alan Greenspan, today it's Ben Bernanke, is going to lower interest rates, it just means they're going to sell bonds to the Federal Reserve, and more dollars are going to flow electronically out into the market, and your dollars are worth less. The opposite happens when they want to raise interest rates, which they hardly ever do. All right, so we got the camel's nose under the tent, 1913. That's one of the most important years in Americans' history, is 1913. The camel's nose goes under the tent flap. Are you with me, class? All right, give me an amen. All right, very good. Well, it was time for a war. Beware the presidential candidate that runs on the concept of staying out of a war. Because Wilson did it. His election phrase for his re-election was, he kept us out of the war. And yet he couldn't wait to get us into World War I in time to make sure a whole bunch of our young men got killed. And so a war is expensive. So what do you do to the money supply? You print a whole bunch of it, don't you? Well, how do you do that? Well, you got the Federal Reserve now. So you kick up interest rates, you inflate like crazy. And what ultimately happens when all the war making is done and all the boys come back home? Well, they don't have jobs. You don't need as many tanks, and you go into a recession. So they go into a recession in 1920 and 21. So they have a meeting on Long Island. France is demanding gold. All this stuff is happening. And they decide to inflate the heck out of the money, is basically what they decided. We're going to print a whole bunch of it. And then guess what we had? The roaring 20s, man. It was party time. It was John Law in France in the 1700s all over again. Money's everywhere. It's great. Everybody's partying. And then along comes rumors of something called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, the brainchild of a supposedly conservative president, fiscally conservative president named Herbert Hoover. And he said, you know, we got to stop all these foreign imports coming in because we got all this money. We're buying so much stuff. Our dollars not, we're buying all these. We got to put up barriers and stop. The government needs to do something. And so just the rumors of putting up tariffs, over 1,000 economists signed a petition for the government not to pass this tariff act, and they debated about it for years. And just the talk of it spooked the stock market. In 1929, we had a crash. And a lot of people think, what happened to the Great Depression? Well, the stock market crashed. Everybody lost their money. The banks didn't have it for them, and people commit suicide. And then it was down like that for a long time. That's not what happened. Hardly anybody commit suicide. Yes, the Dow took a huge dip down, but 1 year later, it was back up to the same value it had been in October of 29. What happened was, people got spooked by the tariff. Real business people who understood what it was going to do to their business got spooked by the tariff, and they started disinvesting, pulling money out. The market crashes, and then don't waste a good crisis. Here comes the government. Now we take the camel's nose, and we pull his whole head into the tent. Because the 30s, if 1913 was the year the empire was born and the republic died, the 30s is when he got off breast milk and started eating real food, this empire. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act went into law in 1932, which deepened the recession into a depression. All the countries of the world fought back by passing their own tariffs, and we were in a commercial war with all the other countries of the world, pretty much. So the government decided to fix this, the mess they'd created, and they passed the 1934 Wagner Act, which created unions and gave them tons of power. Now, we needed collective bargaining at the time, but again, it's another camel's nose under the tent flap, grew into a monster. We also created Fannie Mae, the Federal National Mortgage Association, which put the United States government in the lending business to people to get homes. We also created in 1934 the Gold Reserve Act, which said that no longer could Americans turn. Remember the goldsmiths? When you give your gold to the goldsmith, he'd give you a slip of paper and you'd come back and turn it in, he'd give you gold. Now the goldsmith said, get out of here, don't come back anymore. You just keep the paper slips I gave you, it's enough. No American citizen could turn in his paper slips anymore for gold. As a matter of fact, gold became illegal to own in the United States of America until the mid-70s. And it's an element on the periodic chart. It doesn't kill people. It doesn't hurt trees. But it was a federal offense to own it for anything other than jewelry or teeth filling. For 40 years. Only the government and its international trading partners could have any. So we're off the gold standard. Now that money is not really money. It's only money because the government said it is. That was another great thing that happened in 34. And then 35, the government continues to fix the problem it created by creating Social Security, the world's biggest Ponzi scheme. You know, Ponzi in 1919, a guy named Ponzi came up with this idea that he would get some money from you and promise you a 10% return. And if he could get enough money from enough people and promise a 10% return, he could take the money he got from you and give 10% of it back to him. Say, see, it's working great, man. I'm a great investor. And what do you think you'd do as soon as you made your 10%, like he said? You double down. Man, let me give you twice as much. This is working good. They take that and give that back to you. And as long as a new guy came along, feeding the back end of the pipe, he had stuff to go out the front end. And then he skimmed a bunch off for himself. It worked great. Well, they finally put him in prison. But it was such a good idea. Government noticed how good that worked and decided to make it mandatory. Ponzi ended up in jail. They ought to take him back out of there. They should have put him in charge of the Social Security program. I mean, it worked so good, the government decided to do it. They never did have it funded. It never was insurance. It was always a pipeline Ponzi scheme from the beginning. The first woman to ever receive a check in Social Security, Ida Hunt, was that her name? For some reason, I think that's her name. She paid in $22.25 total. She lived to be 80 years old and took over $20,000 out in Social Security receipts. The first people in a Ponzi scheme always get treated the best. The last ones always get stuck holding the bag. You and I are almost the last ones. We're holding the bag, brother. The younger ones in here, it's going to happen on your watch. They're even worse than Ponzi because they make people do it. At least Ponzi just took volunteers. All right, so Social Security. 1935, Unemployment Act. Here come the unemployment benefits. 1935, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation will insure those deposits, no problem. Of course, they don't have any money in a fund to protect it. If they ever need to insure your funds, guess what they do? Create new money out of thin air, which does what? Causes inflation, which makes the money worth less anyway. What I say at the beginning, you have been conned. Are you following this close enough to even... You don't even have to agree with me on all this. You can kind of see the camel squeezing in now, isn't he? World War II comes along now. What do you got to do in a war? It's expensive. Inflate like crazy. Spend like crazy. Right? And so now we've defeated the war in Europe. It's mostly over. It's almost time to be done with Japan. It's 1944. All the central bankers of the world get together at a meeting called Bretton Woods. This is a very important meeting because the Bretton Woods Agreement said this. It said, well, first thing it did was it created the International Monetary Fund. It created the World Bank. Not only did the United States kill off 2 banks and then get a third one secretly, but now it's a good enough idea. Let's get one for the world. And then the United States currency became the reserve currency of the world. Now everything was done in, all international commerce was done in US dollars. Now what that did was it gave a place for trillions of our extra dollars that normally would have caused inflation and made your prices rise. It was a free buffer. We got away with murder because we could send trillions of dollars around the globe and it didn't hurt your buying power that much. And that lasted for 60 or 70 years that way. So the Bretton Woods Agreement in 44 created those things, made the United States currency the reserve currency of the world. Now, it was still redeemable in gold, not to American citizens, whom it was a felony to own it, but to foreign central banks. They could come in and redeem their U.S. dollars in gold. Foreign banks. All right, let's keep going. 3 things came next Have you ever heard of the Guns and Butter program of the U.S. government? The Guns and Butter program was three things: the Kennedy space race, the Johnson Great Society, and the Vietnam War. Now, these things cost money, right? So they cost money. What do you think happens now to the camel's head? Now we got the whole camel in the tent. The smelly, flea-bitten dude, he's in there. He's all the way in now. So what do you do to pay for this? Inflate the money supply. Man, it's free. Just turn on the printing press. Off we go with money supply. And we start creating the Great Society. Here comes Medicare and Medicaid. Man, let's add on to this. It's more expensive than Social Security. And that Fannie Mae mortgage thing was so good. Let's create another one, Freddie Mac. Nixon, now because of the Vietnam War and all the things that were happening now, we're sent back into another recession. Nixon wants to get reelected. So what's he do? He pumps the economy full of more money so it'll feel good to the voters, so he can get reelected. And we go into this massive situation with who? The Arabian oil-producing nations who are selling us their oil and watching us devalue our dollar as we inflate the heck out of it. And they say, wait a minute, you keep paying us in this money and you're sucking the value out of this money. And besides that, and they were mad at us because we helped Israel with the Yom Kippur War too. And they said, well, we're just not going to sell America any more oil. We're just not going to do it. So because of that, now we still got oil because they'd sell it to Germany, who'd sell it to us. And, people would get it from them and then sell it to us. Just new middlemen popped up. Price went through the roof. Now prices are going high. What do the voters do? You whine to the government to do something. So what the government do? They put price controls in place. They make it illegal if you're a seller of something to raise the price, which means if you're a producer of something and you can't charge more for it, you stop producing it, the shelves go empty, gas lines start to line up, there's no food on the shelves. You talk to people that were of age in the 70s, it's exactly what happened. Then Nixon says, well, this is working so great, government fixing this whole mess, let's put tariffs back in place. Puts 10% tariff out there, starts a trade war again around the world. Then in 1974, ERISA, E-R-I-S-A, the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, created the 401k plan. You know what those are? You remember those? What that did was that took the little guy and put him in the stock market. So not only did the big bankers get control of the American creation of money, now they're going to get the savings coming back in their direction too. And the little guy got in there and got slaughtered. We had a little reprieve in 1979 when a guy named Paul Volcker took over the Federal Reserve. He realized the money supply was way too inflated, and he started reversing it. He started deflating the money supply and pumping value back into the U.S. dollar. At the same time, Reagan got in the White House and he pushed through his tax cut program. Now, he still spent money like a crazy man. That part never got fixed. But just lowering taxes and restricting the money supply brought in the 80s, the great economy of the 80s. And remember, they call it the greed generation? This is where the yuppies were born, driving their sport utilities. Everything was great, man. Economy's fantastic. It's all about me. It was the me decade. Along comes Alan Greenspan, takes over the Fed in 86. Technology takes off in the early 90s. Greenspan starts inflating the money supply. Wall Street started rewarding short-term profits. They had all this 401k money. All these mutual funds grew up like crazy. Wall Street starts rewarding short-term profits, stops rewarding long-term manufacturing gains, and we start seeing our factories being shipped overseas. All we're rewarding is little quick quarterly statements. The internet takes off. 90s are great. Everything's roaring. Stock market's going up. Everybody's day trading stocks. 401ks are going through the roof. Everybody's counting their chickens before they hatch. And what happened in 2000? Tech market bubble pops, right? All of a sudden, nobody's trading day stocks anymore, none of that stuff. We go into the 2000s. Everybody that takes their money from the technology stocks, and where do they go? Real estate. The herd is always running somewhere. The mob is always dashing to the latest thing. And so it goes from the tech stocks, all right, forget that. Now we're going into real estate. And man, they started creating all kinds of stuff. Subprime loans, creative mortgages. Use your home as an ATM card. Every 2 years, man, it's worth 20% more. Go back to the mortgage, get another mortgage, get a second mortgage, redo it. Adjustable rate mortgage, interest only. Buy the flat screen TV, get the new sport utility. This is great. Take a trip, buy a condo, get a third property, a fourth. Let's flip houses. We have flip houses. They always go up in value. Just put a little paint on it and flip it. 2008, what happens? Housing bubble pops. Starting to get used to these bubbles popping. And now we've entered into the decade of government debt, of public debt. It's another bubble looking for a pin. Only it's a bubble that's so big, it's not just the camel in the tent. There's a whole herd of camels cramming their way into the tent. We ain't never seen a tent with this many camels in it. They're all over the place, pooping on the rugs, and it's a mess. And they're inviting more camels in. When they say national deficit, they mean the amount of money the government spends more than it makes in a year. When they say national debt, that's when you add up all the deficits, the total that's sitting there. For the first time, we're running $1 trillion plus deficits. And our recent administration told us just expect that. It's going to happen for a while now. Our national debt, the low estimate is $9 trillion. That's the actual hardcore current account balance, $9 trillion. Just go Google $1 trillion and compare it to a million or a billion. It'll blow you away how much that is. Many people say if you throw Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and George W. Bush's wonderful Medicaid D, where they pay for all the prescription meds, which is more expensive than the original Ponzi scheme of Social Security. If you throw all that together, it's somewhere between 53 trillion, but the governor of the Central Bank of Texas said it's actually 99 trillion. It'll never be paid off. It's impossible. There's only two ways the government gets out of that mess. They either print so much money to pay it off with money that's almost valueless and we become Zimbabwe or Argentina, or they basically default on it and say, to heck with you, rest of the world, we ain't paying it. Here's our new currency. It's called the Amero, the Scamo, the whatever. We ain't paying our debts, and they're gone. There's only two ways. Neither one of those situations play out very good for the average American person. You know why? Because the average American person is in debt too. He looked at Uncle Sam, looks like a good idea to me. The tax laws, the regulations, 401ks, everything was all lined up to con the average American person with a job to get into debt too and to start consuming. And we've got a nation of credit addicts. ADDICTS, addicts. It's like we need a 12-step program to get off credit. It's like crack. You got crack cards in your wallet. It's amazing. I sit down to talk with people. They go through their finances. I'm thinking, what? How did we ever come to think that this was normal to buy something we can't afford? And the answers are always come back, well, I need it, it was tough. We just use credit cards to get through. We think we're buying necessities. We're really wasting money most of the time on luxurious things that most of the rest of the world would look at us and think it's luxurious stuff. To buy name branded this and pre-cut that and all those things. You've been conned. Here's some of the things we were taught to believe that are totally wrong. Number one, stocks are good for the long term. Just buy them and hold them. There's some truth to that in the right market at the right time, especially if they pay dividends, which we've been taught not to even expect. We've been turned into a nation of speculators and not investors. Number two, housing prices always go up. Number three, this is a big one. Debt and borrowing is normal and necessary. Now, all debt is not bad. There is some debt that makes sense. If you're a manufacturing corporation and you need to invest in capital equipment to expand your operations and fill a new market or create a new market, that's how economies recover. They don't recover by the government throwing out fake money that dilutes the money that's already out there and telling you to keep shopping and be a patriot. Keep going into more debt or you're a bad American. That's not how economies recover. That just blows up the bubble bigger, looking for a sharper pin. Number four, the government is supposed to, quote, make things better. Isn't it their job? Isn't it the government's job to make things better? No. If you go back and read the original documents, the job of the government was to protect the people from a huge government. Either outside governments or itself. Those papers were written in fear of government. Now our people worship government. They go to the government and pray for more food, and pray for more protection, and pray for more fixes, and pray for more help, and pray for more assistance. So much so that we don't even realize that churches used to do that. People used to do that. Families used to do that for thousands of years. But now that the government does it, everybody else kind of hesitant to do it. It's like bleeding a dying patient. Government creates a problem with a bad policy. Then everybody gets panicked about it, asks the government to do something about it. So the government creates another policy to fix the problem they created, which makes it worse, which never waste a bad crisis, ratchet it up, put a few more camels in the tent, and we're in this spiral. And people don't even understand this stuff. They can't hardly even stay awake through this talk. But it's the forest you're in. When we talk about making money, it doesn't mean anything if that money doesn't mean anything. Like you're going to have to learn kind of the water that you're drowning in here. Number five, Again, all of these are kind of true, but they're not exactly what they seem. Number 5, America is free. Here's another one. Number 6, democracy is good. I challenge you to read the founding documents and find the word democracy in there. You won't. The only time you'll find the word democracy is when the founding fathers were writing about it as though it were the scourge of the earth. We're not a democracy. Well, we are now. We weren't founded as a democracy. We were founded as a republic. What's the difference? A democracy says the mob rules. And I'm here to tell you the mob is wrong. The mob put Hitler in office. The mobs are dangerous things. Have you ever seen a mob? Have you ever seen films of what happened in Liberia? Have you ever seen films of what happened in Rwanda when the mobs hit the streets? Mobs are dangerous. James Madison said the only thing worse than a democracy is the violence of its death. How tragic a democracy ends when the mob takes over. We're a republic. Our government is supposed to be restrained by its founding documents, and it's supposed to have representative government. But yet our presidents, the past 5 of them or so, have said things like, we want to export democracy around the world, make it a better place. Well, it doesn't look like it makes it a better place. How about exporting like the freedom of the individual and economic limited government and sound money and low taxes, things that make economies work? China is communistic in name only. They're freer financially than we are. They have less government regulation, less taxes, and more stable money supply. As soon as they unpeg the yuan from the dollar, we're going to see all that come to fruition. Next. Political parties represent different constituencies, and one is totally wrong and one is totally right. Aren't we led to believe that nonsense? You can't hardly tell them apart. The road back for our nation is 3 things. Number 1, stable money that the government can't play with. That's why you hear people talk about a gold standard, a commodity standard. We need something. Number 2, lower taxes. Quit putting a load on the back of the hiker trying to make it up the hill. If you keep taxing the engine, pretty soon the whole train stops. Right now, 40% of the United States pays no income taxes, effectively pays no income taxes. I put that on one of my blog postings, and somebody asked me the question back, do you mean, they thought I meant like they are conscientious dissenters, like they refuse to pay somehow and are getting away with it. There is that wacko little lunatic fringe doing that, and they normally end up in jail. That's not what I mean. I mean that their bottom 40% of the United States population pays no income tax. They either get it all back or more, or they don't pay any to begin with. They're on the dole. When that number gets to 51%, it's over. It's over. It's a mob, and there's no stopping them. Do you realize how close we are? So number 2, lower taxes. Number 3, deregulation. Less rules, less laws. Those are the 3 ways you start getting the camels out of the tent. Stable money, lower taxes, deregulation. I don't have time tonight, but I could go through the points in history where those things have even kind of happened and show you economically what took place. It's amazing. It's like breathing oxygen into a suffocating patient, what happens in the economy. But those things are very politically tough to accomplish to a short-term voter that wants his handout. Why do I tell you all this? Why in the world did I walk you through a list of details on something? Why did I do that? Because a storm is a-coming. You want to talk about a perfect storm, and it's going to hit everybody. We're already kind of in it. We've had a couple bubble pops. There's a huge one coming. Here's what this means to you, and I'm going to bring it all the way kind of back around to where Terri started. You got to get out of debt. If they inflate the money supply and it's runaway hyperinflation, that won't matter. But normally when you go into a depression, you can't bypass deflation, and then your debt will kill you. When everybody goes from making $25 an hour to $7, and they're thankful for the $7, that $100,000 mortgage they had is all of a sudden over 3 times as big. It's like suddenly having a $300,000 mortgage. They'll never be able to pay it. You're toast. Debt will kill you if the economy goes into deflation, which it may. Most of the experts seem to think it can't even get there for a while because Ben Bernanke in the Federal Reserve, he's even said they'll drop money out of helicopters if they have to keep it from going into deflation. I want you to just think about that statement for a minute by the guy that has his hand on the spigot of the money you're sweating your life away to earn. That guy is in control of whether your money has value or not. Can you believe that? It's unbelievable. But get out of debt. It's better safe than sorry. Get out of debt. It's so silly to be in the wealthiest spot in the world at the wealthiest point in history and you can't pay your bills. How could you explain that to somebody from the third world? How can we explain it to our grandchildren? You know, I saw a political cartoon the other day, and it showed this nursery of all these babies in there screaming and crying. And some guy said, "What's wrong? Are they sick?" And he goes, "No, they just found out they owe $99 trillion.
The United States is suffering from credit addiction. It's the American disease. Most people's finances is a house of cards, credit cards. Here's the bottom line. You don't need it. And never finance luxury. Never finance luxury. The only thing you should finance is something that's going to return money to you beyond the amount of interest that you pay to have the loan. That's an asset. An asset is something that kicks off income. Anything else is not an asset. Your home isn't an asset unless you rent it to somebody. Number 2, develop cash flow. You need an asset that kicks money in your direction as fast as it can, and it needs to kick it faster than they're dribbling it out of the Federal Reserve. You got to make it faster than they devalue it. You understand the concept? You see why I went through this whole long thing? You have to have a point of reference for why it's so important. Part of your storm shelter against a rainy day is going to be this. You need to develop something that can cash flow like crazy. We tend to think in terms of static situations. Today is the way today is, so tomorrow will be the way tomorrow is. It's not how it goes. I was reading a comment by someone that was in the Weimar Republic in Germany between World War I and World War II, before Hitler was elected chancellor. And he said it was the weirdest thing. On whatever day it was a Wednesday. I went to work, opened up my little store. I sold merchandise. Everything seemed fine. Prices had gone up a little bit. Things seemed a little crazy in the news. The next day, it was pandemonium. I woke up just like any other day, and it was over. Because that Weimar government had inflated its money supply. When it pops, it pops. And when people aren't ready, there's no recourse. Develop cash flow. Find an asset that develops cash flow so that you can start building your shelter against the rainy day. It always rains, doesn't it? It's always going to rain again. Even if all of this is wrong, there's still going to be a downturn. You need cash flow against a rainy day. Next, invest in fundamentals, not gimmicks. If you see the herd running some way, automatically don't go that way. The reason they're in a herd is because they get slaughtered. The average guy lost his shirt and his 401k because he rode the tech bubble. And the average guy never bought gold. And the average guy has 3 mortgages on his house. And the average guy files bankruptcy. And the average guy finances luxuries. Well, I did a lot of those other things, and I'm learning about the rest of it. Do you know what it's worth, what I'm teaching you tonight? You know what the financial value is of this? Own real things. Own real things. Picture things. When you own them, you own them. A car that runs and is dependable is a car that runs and dependable. Doesn't matter what the government's doing in the money supply. If you own it and own it, you own it. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to find gas for it at some point, but you got the car. Own real things. Number 8, 7, 9. Get good at math. In a little bit of a way, become a hoarder. Become a hoarder. It's hard to say that without sounding that right. You think about it. People don't have enough in the bank to make it 2 months. Most people are barely making it week to week. It's embarrassing. In China, they work for 1/20th of what you work for. We save nothing, negative savings rate. They live in a shack and save 25% of what they make. We've spent $35 billion less consuming things in the past quarter because we're waking up to it, right? We don't have the money we used to have. We can't just go to our mortgage like an ATM machine. The United States spent $35 billion less consuming goods in the last quarter. China just spent $40 billion more. They've not only taken up our slack, they've matched it. They've gone beyond it some. That's going to keep happening as our incomes go down and our prices go up. Our standard of living will go down. As their incomes go up, they're going to start doing all the consuming we could never do before. The more they consume, the more Russia, China, India, and Brazil start to join. It's like the rise of the rest. The more they come up and join us in the primary world, the more their markets will take all the goods that we used to get so cheap here, the less interested they'll be in buying our debt anymore. And if they ever pull the plug and say we're decoupling our currencies from the sinking United States dollar, there'll be a massive U.S. dollar bubble pop. It's backed by nothing but the force of the United States government. The only good thing is we got the strongest military in the world. We'd probably go to war with them, maybe just to make them stop. I don't know. Who knows how that'll go? But most Americans can't make it several weeks with what they've got. They don't have enough food in their pantry to go 2 weeks. They don't have anything stocked up anyway. We don't have anything saved. Nothing physical saved. They got all kinds of electronics and stuff. They'll shut off the GPS stuff. Those won't work anymore. The cell phones will be shut down. I mean, when you look at how all this goes, what are we really prepared for? Surprise, shock, awe, tears, blame. Government ought to do something. It'll do something, but I don't think you'll like what it'll be doing. Now, I really don't think it's going to get to all the gloom and doom ending there, or I probably wouldn't be wasting my time talking to you and trying to help you get me to help save the country. But if we don't wake up, anything's possible. I think people are going to wake up. I think Americans have a great spirit. I think we're one of the most productive populations in the world because there's something in the character of our people that aren't going to let this go all the way down the slippery slope. We're going to turn it around. There's a lot of ways to turn it around. Stable money, lower taxes, deregulate, get rid of some of these stupid laws that restrict stuff. Stop robbing Peter to pay Paul and counting on the enthusiastic support of Paul. It's time Paul gets his butt kicked. We can turn it around. That doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare against a rainy day, though. It doesn't mean you shouldn't invest in an asset that kicks a whole bunch of money in your direction really fast and then invest it in smart stuff. Be wise, don't waste it, don't finance luxury. Stop living like an average American. Start living like a contrarian American and become the mainstream with your contrarianism, the kind of mainstream that saves money again, that builds things again, that exports things again, the kind of things that made us prosperous. Every time I try to give this talk, I get the same look from people that you're giving me right now. But hopefully you see enough forest for the trees to realize why it's so important what you and I do. I'm pretty protected. I've got all my strategies in place. I got all my hedges. I've been reading about this stuff, learning about this stuff. I'm going to handle the winds just fine. But you aren't yet. And that's why I'm here. And you got families that'll never listen to this, that'll never get this fixed. And they're going to come running to you if the winds blow too hard. You not only got to think about yourself, but your family. I mean, somebody in each family has to be smart enough to build a shelter against a rainy day. Right now, we got a shelter scarcity in our country. One of the hardest things to find in America is a shelter against a rainy day. We've been told by our government and the Federal Reserve that it never rains. When the economy's going good, they make more money. When the economy goes bad, they make a whole bunch more money. But that game can't go on forever. Sooner or later, all those trillions of dollars around the globe in foreign banks are going to come home to roost. And when they do, you'll never be able to say that you weren't warned. We love you guys so much. We're so excited about where we are in time, because it is kind of true that you never waste a good crisis. But I don't mean government encroachment on individuals' freedoms. I mean individuals taking their freedoms back from government encroachment. Good people wake up in a crisis.
You've been listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. For more information, please go to financialfitnessinfo.com. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future for you. The information presented in this audio is for general education purposes only and provides information the speakers believe to be accurate on the subject matter covered. It's sold with the understanding that neither the speakers nor the producers are providing advice for any particular portfolio or for any individual's particular situation, or rendering investment advice or other professional services such as legal or accounting advice. If expert assistance in areas that include investment, legal, and accounting advice is needed, please seek a competent professional's services. This audio may make reference to performance data collected over various periods of time. Remember that past results do not guarantee future performance. Performance data, as well as laws and regulations, change over time, which could affect the applicability of the information presented in this audio. Any data presented herein is used merely to illustrate the underlying principles. This audio is not to serve as the basis for any financial decision or as a recommendation of any specific investment. No warranty is made with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. And both the speakers and producers specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this audio. You've been listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. For more information, please go to financialfitnessinfo.com. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future for you. The information presented in this audio is for general education purposes only and provides information the speakers believe to be accurate on the subject matter covered. It's sold with the understanding that neither the speakers nor the producers are providing advice for any particular portfolio or for any individual's particular situation, or rendering investment advice or other professional services such as legal or accounting advice. If expert assistance in areas that include investment, legal, and accounting advice is needed, please seek a competent professional's services. This audio may make reference to performance data collected over various periods of time. Remember that past results do not guarantee future performance. Performance data, as well as laws and regulations, change over time, which could affect the applicability of the information presented in this audio. Any data presented herein is used merely to illustrate the underlying principles. This audio is not to serve as the basis for any financial decision or as a recommendation of any specific investment. No warranty is made with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. And both the speakers and producers specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this audio. You're listening to the Financial Fitness Audio Series. This CD was selected to help you build your income, get out of debt, and prosper in any economy. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future. New York Times best-selling author Orrin Woodward has sold more than 1 million books in 6 languages, holds 4 U.S. patents, and has been named one of Inc. magazine's top 50 leadership and management experts. Laurie Woodward dedicates her life to making the lives of others better. She shares her message of grace and human potential in homes and on stages throughout North America.
It has been an amazing weekend already, and we're just getting started. So I just am so proud of everybody that's been on this stage, whether they were speaking or being recognized. It's just amazing what can happen when you apply certain principles in your life. And so here's a really tough question. What color is the financial fitness box? That's awesome. Okay, how many CDs are in the box? You guys are really good. How many books are in the box? Is there a bumper sticker in the box? You guys are really good. You must have one of those green boxes. Okay, well, let me ask you one last question. What are the 7 basic foundational principles? Cricket. What? All right, well, let me help you out with that. I'll kind of go through them. Because in the book, it talks about the offense, the defense, and the playing field, right? We all know the gist of it, whatever. But here's the thing. Has anybody ever built a house? Anybody lived in a house? So, because, for a while there, we lived in a trailer, and there was no foundation, really, to the trailer. So when we moved into a house and when we built our house, I realized how important a foundation and having a good, solid foundation is. We live in hurricane country or state, whatever, and there's hurricanes. And so I want to make sure our foundation is solid. And if you want to live in financial freedom, then you want to make sure your foundation is solid. And so these principles are the foundation of getting out of the financial matrix and living in the life you've always wanted to live. So principle number 1 says, it's not what you make, but what you keep that determines financial success. Pay yourself first, no problem. I can pay myself first. But then it says, and save what you pay yourself. Oh. We have to save it? Well, that's a little harder. We recommend putting 10% away. And we did this with our kids. They had containers, whatever they were, soup can, peanut butter jars, whatever. We had 3 containers each. One was for, saving, one was for tithing, and one was for they could spend. But we wanted them to understand the importance of putting money away, physically putting money in whatever container they had. And so saving is really important. So pay yourself first, and then save what you pay yourself. Don't touch it. Okay, so then principle number 2 says, money is a gift. It has a specific use. This means that you have a stewardship. You are to use your money for something that matters for your family and beyond. Okay, so I love that principle because it really isn't ours. At the end of the day, we are just stewards of our money. And I love that principle. And in there, at the end of this topic, they talk about, prioritizing our spending, right? Because we're going to spend. We're going to spend money. But let's prioritize our spending. And they say this, the first and most important level of the hierarchy is investing in yourself. You've heard a lot of that this weekend, investing in yourself. By investing in your personal development and financial and leadership education, expanding your ability and capacity to perform, and investing in entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial activities. Benjamin Franklin wrote, now listen carefully because this is so cool. If a man empties his purse into his head, no man can take it away from him. An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. No one can take away what you put in here. That's why we say listen to CDs, read books, get an education, invest in yourself first. And then they go on to ask some I love these questions. And if you've read this book and you just kind of skim through the questions, I encourage you to go back and really answer the questions. So they say, now that you have a new savings account and plan to increase it every time you get paid, because remember, we're going to save and we're not going to touch it. How are you applying principle 2? Specifically, what is your stewardship? What is your mission in life? What is your long-term vision and dream? What do you want to do with your life stewardship? How much money will you need to effectively accomplish your dreams and plans? So those are some really good questions that really, if you want to live out of the financial matrix, you kind of got to have a plan. And so I encourage you to answer those questions. And, it's funny because you think so we have some money in the bank. We're doing pretty good. So you'd think I'd be able to go spend whatever I want. Well, it's not the case. We have rules. We have principles that we apply even to this day. For example, we have a 24-hour rule. How many have ever heard of the 24-hour rule? Yeah, it's a good rule, isn't it? So if I want to buy something and my limit is $500, I don't have to ask if I could go buy groceries or anything. But if I want to buy something, first of all, I check with Orrin and I wait 24 hours. Well, I try to wait 24 hours regardless, even if it's under $500. And I like that rule because I tend to, or in the past, was an emotional shopper. I thought it filled some kind of void. It didn't. It just created a wider void. And while it felt good for a minute, man, it felt so bad afterwards because I knew I was violating principles. So we have that 24-hour rule where I really want to get those pair of shoes. They're really cute. Walk away, slowly walk away from the shoes. Sleep on it for 24 hours. Do I really need another pair of black shoes? Really? You need to read this book. Okay. But anyway, so you're making an educated decision versus an emotional one. And so I love that rule, 24-hour rule. Okay, so principle number 3, this was a tough one for me. Live within your means, always. No exceptions, period. Follow a good budget. Budget. Nobody likes that word, budget. Okay, give each a spouse a small allowance. My allowance was $20 a week for four kids and me. I think it was a little too small. So be reasonable. Anyway, so you can have a little discretionary money each month and don't nitpick each other on little things. Okay. So live within your means, right? Okay, well, Orrin's always said, God, you always have this Cadillac taste. I don't mean to. I like stuff, like nice stuff. And when my kids were little, I just thought the Gymboree clothes, how many know Gymboree clothes? They were the cutest things. They were so cute. And I just had to have them. They were just, we had suffered long and hard and it was time. So I would buy my children Gymboree clothes when we could not afford it. It was not in our budget. It was way over my $20 that I had to spend a week. You could get a sock for $20. Not even a pair, just one. So it was crazy. So I learned, whatever. And so instead of going to Gymboree, I shopped at a store called Waddles and Toddles. Now, Waddles and Toddles was a used or a consignment store where, I could find clothes that were pre-owned and pre-worn by children who I guess never played because they looked new. They weren't like worn out or anything. Or maybe it was bought by a wife and she wasn't supposed to purchase it and her husband made her go sell it. I don't know, but that's where I went from Gymboree to Waddles and Toddles. And at first I was a little embarrassed, but then it became kind of fun. Like, what kind of deals can I find, And they had maternity clothes, so I bought some maternity clothes from there. And, and if people think, wow, I would never do that. Well, I don't know. I think it turned out pretty good, I don't know. Let's just say I'm not shopping at Waddles and Toddles anymore. So principle number 4. Stop getting financial advice from broke people. Get it only from those whose finances you want to emulate. Now, I love my parents. I think that they're amazing. And when Orrin and I were on the verge of getting a divorce, I went to my mom and I said, I can't stand it anymore. I was pregnant for our 3rd child. And she gave me the absolute best advice. She said, first, you can't stay here. What? What do you mean I can't? What? Where am I? I got children and a child in here, and he's mean. Where am I supposed to go? She goes, well, you can't stay here. Okay, fine. And she goes, let me tell you, Laurie, I don't have fruit on the tree. You guys need to go get help. Because my mom had been divorced several times. She did the best thing she could have ever done. She didn't try to give me advice because she didn't have the fruit on the tree. So be careful. I'm very thankful for my mother. So that's in that area. But this is the same principle in the finances. If the people that you're taking advice from don't have the life that you're wanting to live, then maybe you should stop taking advice from them. Right? And I don't think people try to give you advice. Your parents aren't out to get you. Well, some are. Are you the guy that's going to buy the black shoes with that? Okay. Anyway. I believe that my parents were not out to get me. They gave me the best advice that they could. Okay? You and I can talk later. I got good books for you. Okay. So, principle number 5. Oh, here's the B word again. Consistently budget and save for unexpected expenses. Sometimes we start making money, and so we just start spending more money, right? Because that's easy to do. But really, we shouldn't do that. We want to set up an account, and it's an emergency fund, and we want to get that account to at least $1,000 as fast as possible. Because you know what? Stuff happens. Stuff happens. You're doing good, like you got your belt is tightened, and you're living in the budget. You're in there. And then the washer breaks. And then the car breaks down. And then the roof needs to be replaced, all in the same month. That's a lot of expenses. And so we have to plan for those unexpected expenses. So that is principle number 5. Principle number 6. Oh, and by the way, that account is truly for emergencies only. And another pair of black shoes, I don't care, it's not an emergency. So only touch it for emergencies. Okay, number 6, pay 10% of your income to tithing. Give even if you are really broke. Giving puts you in a mindset of abundance and puts any financial worries in their proper perspective. So it should not be limited to just tithing. The Bible categorizes giving as tithes and offerings. And I love this. I almost think that should be right up there first. Because again, it's not really our money. We're just giving back what's already his. And maybe there's some of you out there that don't agree with this or don't understand. And you know what? That's okay. But this is a really key principle. It's a foundational principle. So if you don't understand it, dig in and get some more information. So principle number 7 is using your time, money, and talents to genuinely help others naturally increases your happiness. Isn't that cool? When you help other people, you're generally more happy. So seeking money for money's sake may or may not influence your happiness, but seeking money in order to fulfill your stewardship and serve and bless others automatically increases it. So invest in other people's lives. Serve other people. There is no greater joy. And maybe you're out there thinking, you have no idea, lady. I'm so far in debt, I can't think about serving anybody else. Well, there's the problem. Quit focusing on, oh, woe is me. Quit having a pity party and go serve other people. It's just awesome the way it works. That's what it's all about. Don't collect stuff, make memories. This is the best opportunity. I'm so excited about getting people out of this matrix and getting people into the life that they've always wanted to live. And it's not that hard, you guys. It's not. If I, who had no financial, I had an accounting degree, but I did not know how to manage my money. To Orrin, debt was cancer. To me, it was a way of life. Honestly, that's what I was taught. Honey, you're going to be in debt for the rest of your life anyway, so go ahead. Sweet. As a teenager, that's real nice to hear. But as a 30-year-old who has kids, that is not good. Because it's not okay. Debt is not okay. And it doesn't have to be that way. You do not have to live in the financial matrix. You do not have to have debt. You can be completely financially free. And you're here today, and we're proud of you for that. And I just encourage you to get the information, stay on this journey, and go live the life you were meant to live. There's no greater place than right here, teaching you the right principles. We are so proud of you guys. Let's win. Let's win big. This is your year. And I'm so proud of my husband who loved me through my financial issues and has helped me grow in every area of my life. I want to share him with you now. Here's Orrin.
All right. Okay. The green box, the financial fitness program, which means it's a whole system. I want to walk through. This is going to be the logical talk of the weekend. This is going to be the one that says, let's put all the emotion that we've talked about, let's put all the heart that you've seen on this stage, let's put all the other factors, and let me help you understand the reasons behind the emotion, the logic behind the emotions that you see on this stage. The first thing you keep hearing about this term, the financial matrix. And the financial matrix is a system of control. The banks get to create money out of thin air, loan it to you, and then you get to spend the rest of your life paying it back. You ever hear of getting a mortgage and someone gets a 30-year mortgage? And so what the bank does is they literally, in their ledgers, in the computers now, they say, okay, here's $150,000 if you get a mortgage. And then for the next 30 years, you get the privilege of working on a job in order to pay back money that they instantaneously created out of thin air. And if you don't pay it back, guess what they get? They get your house. You're like, now, wait a minute. If you went and wrote a check and you didn't have the money in your bank to pay for it, what do they call that? Fraud. If you were to make some counterfeit money and use it as real money, what do they call that? But if the banks do it, they call that loaning you money. Something to make you go, And so the financial matrix, we can't go and change the financial matrix right away until we change your financial matrix. In other words, a free person can afford their opinion. And so we want to help you, first of all, get out of the matrix to where you can afford your opinion. And how we do that is two ways. To escape the financial matrix, you need to learn how to play financial defense and financial offense. And so the defense is learning how to spend less than you make. If you spend less than you make, compounded over time, you make a lot of money. You end up saving a ton of money. That's step one. Step two, financial offense is learning to make more year after year after year. If you increase your skills and make more money, then make more money than the cost of living increase. If cost of living is going up 2% and you're getting a 2% raise, you didn't get a raise. And so those are the two things. And are you playing defense? Yes or no? Are you playing offense? Yes or no? And so the financial matrix is just a simple 2x2 matrix to identify this graph, this quadrants, to identify where you are. Now, you've probably seen the 45-year plan if you've attended any meeting, you heard one of the speakers get up and talk about your income over time. And if you take a look at the traditional 45-year plan, your income goes up somewhere around 25, it levels off. And the average American from age 25 to when they retire, somewhere between 65 and 70, they get cost of living raises only. So their income is flatline. And then you retire and you lose 1/2 to 2/3 of what you already didn't think was enough before. Now, who in their right mind would can you imagine an 18-year-old kid and say, please draw out the income over age curve that you would like to live with? Can you imagine any 18-year-old kid saying, sign me up for what 95% of Americans do? I would like to make a little more income in my early years, man, just to give me some super hope. But somewhere around 25, put it flatline, baby. I want to earn it the old-fashioned way. Nobody would draw that graph. And so when you look at that, it's like, well, if that's the graph of 95% of Americans, how would you play defense and offense in that graph? Well, here's what defense is. Defense is when your spending curve is less than your income curve. And you say, well, that should be pretty easy. I mean, if you know someone that makes $50,000 a year, have you ever noticed that people make $50,000 a year? Most of them are broke at $50,000 a year. And if you talk to them, they said, if I only made 75, things would be so different. And yet, then you go talk to the person making 75, and what do they say? Man, if I only made 100, things would be different. You understand that if you don't get your spending less than your income, if you don't get the discipline of doing that now, that it doesn't matter what you make. In fact, I would tell you that if you actually do learn how to make $1 million a year, you're actually in worse shape. Because if you make $1 million a year and you don't understand financial literacy, you can give yourself a $5 million problem. Versus if you only make $50,000, you give yourself about a $400,000 problem. So that's what God has been protecting me all this time. That's one way to interpret it. I think that he might say, learn the habit of defense. So there's your defense. Let's see what offense is. Look at that. That is clearly you've broken out of the mold where you are earning more above just cost of living because you're improving your skills. So the offense, you improve your skills yearly so that you start getting more income wherever you work and whatever business you're doing. The defense is whatever you make in, spend less than you make. That's the two rules. And so when we look at it into the financial matrix quadrants, the first quadrant is offense, no. Defense, no. And what we label that one is the broke quadrant. And 50% of Americans, think about it, the wealthiest nation in the world. And 50% of Americans, if you total up the household's total assets and their total liabilities, their debts, it's 0 or worse. Can you imagine that? Let's go back to the 18-year-old kid. And you say there's only 4 quadrants that you're going to fall into on offense and defense. Which quadrant would you like to be a part of? Who in their right mind would say, give me the broke one? I don't want to accumulate any assets. I want to live just at that limit. I want to work my whole life. The problem with the broke quadrant is not just that you're not playing defense and offense. It's the absolute worst spot on the matrix. And I do not believe that 50% of Americans planned to be in that spot. What happened? What happens is they've got these dreams. They've got things that they want, and they keep getting inundated by advertisements and all kinds of marketing gimmicks that say, same as cash. You just sign here and we give you what you want. And they give you some material thing that over time depreciates, and then you pay monthly payments on it over and over. And if it was just one, you might be able to survive. But then they tell you that you also need a car and you sign for that one. And then they say, oh, well, you probably want some new furniture, sign for that one. Hey, you may want a vacation package, sign for that. And you sign so much that the next thing you know that you're living at a point to where you have more money going out than you're coming in every month, and you're living right on the edge.
And so what happens eventually is the only reason why you don't just keep increasing your debt is because the bank no longer gives you any. Anybody ever try to get a credit card and you couldn't get it? Anybody try to get a new car loan and they wouldn't give it to you? Anybody try to get a bigger house and you couldn't qualify for the loan? In other words, the banks just say, we can't loan you any more money. And so what life becomes for 50% of Americans is captured in the common saying, I owe, it's off to work we go. You're not chasing dreams anymore. 50% of Americans are living lives of quiet desperation. Their dreams have collapsed down to nothing. Their debt has gone as high as they possibly can. They can't borrow anymore. So they can't even think about a dream. And so the danger of living in this quadrant is an attitude of hopelessness. Where can we go? We can't get any more debt, so we can't really even in the illusion of living our dreams anymore. All I do is I wake up and I go to work because I have bills to pay. And the debt has gone up to the point where all of your discretionary income goes to service the debt. It's a terrible quadrant to stay in. But if you're there, the good news is the green box has answers to the challenge. The green box can help you out. And you say, oh, Orrin, how can you say that? And listen, if you have not picked up the Financial Fitness Times, this is the most amazing booklet, magazine. This is amazing. These are real people with real testimonies, real stories of applying the green box principles and escaping the financial matrix. You read stories of wiped out $20,000 of credit card debt. You read another story, wiped out $100,000. You read another story, $50,000 of student loans gone. Then when you read these stories, you start saying, if they can do it, then I can do it. If they were in the broke quadrant, or maybe the next quadrants that I share, if they were in that quadrant and were able to escape, then so can I. If you're in the broke quadrant now, do not develop an attitude of hopelessness. Because if you're here this weekend and you've got the green box, you've got a plan to escape. And so the next one. Well, what if you are playing defense? No. I don't spend. I learned that a long time ago. I spend less than I make, Orrin. All right. Well, what about your offense? I haven't figured that one out. I just pretty much get cost of living raises at best. And tightwad is a better quadrant than the broke one. At least you've learned the financial literacy of spending less than you make so it can start compounding for you. But what happens in this is you're playing defense, you're not playing offense. You're disciplined enough to spend less than you make, but you don't have an offensive plan to start making more. And so your whole life ends up being no. Hey, do you want to do this? No, we can't afford it. Hey, do you want to do this? No, we can't afford it. Hey, do you want to do this? No, we can't afford it. And even if you're good at that, even if you're like, oh, I am steel-trapped good, you better hope your spouse is on the same page as you. Otherwise, you would get to have unique conversations with your spouse like I did for years. Because when I said no, she said yes. And then it was like, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, yes. And it would be very interesting. And even if you both are saying no, do you know how to say no consistently for 30 or 40 years? I mean, you know why most people, when they hear about the financial fitness program, if you don't represent it properly as both defense and offense, they think you're telling them that you're going to have to live a life of saying no for the rest of your life. Who wants to do that? You mean, exactly. It's like, why would you want to say, you mean that what you want me to do is say no to all my dreams so that I can be debt free? Most people say, I'll take my dreams in debt. And then I'm telling you, you're asking the wrong question. Why don't you live your dreams and have no debt? That's the right one. That's the right one. So we got to come up for the tightwad. We got to come up with a plan for you to make some more income. We got to come up with a personal development plan for you to start growing your skills. The common saying for the tightwad is, we can't buy it because we can't afford it. And the danger of the attitude is you develop a scarcity. You think that there's only a limited amount and it's never going to go up because you don't understand the offense. And so you just say no your whole life, or a complacently, this is the best it's ever going to be. And what I'm saying is you start throwing away your dreams. Ben Franklin probably said it best. Most people die at 25 and wait till 70 to be buried. Is that really the way we should live? No, we don't. Tightwad, it's a better quadrant than the broke, but it's certainly not optimum. Well, what about the next one? Hey! Okay, I'm not the broke quadrant, and I'm not the tightwad. Man, I am making good money. Well, I made 100,000. I made 200. I made 500,000 last year, Orrin. I am happening on offense. And how's your defense? Non-existent. So you're like a football team that can score 50 points, but you give up 55. And a loss is a loss. It doesn't matter how good the offense is. I mean, if your offense is tracking, man, I'm getting 10% more income. I'm own a business on this. But if your defense, you're spending just as much as you're making, do you understand? It's like jumping on a gerbil wheel and saying, today I'm going to run faster than I've ever run before. And you sprint like crazy and you work up a sweat. And when you get off, you're like, I still don't have anything accumulated. Why? Because you spent everything you made. We've got to learn, for this quadrant, we've got to learn that as you make more, here's a novel concept, one of my favorite all-time statements. It's not delayed gratification if you don't have the money and you don't buy it. Delayed gratification is if you actually made enough money to buy something and you still delay. Now, notice it's delayed gratification. It's a short-term denial. It's not a long-term denial like the tightwad quadrant. This is short-term. This is short-term. Can you delay your gratification for a year or two so you can take that extra money and wipe out all your debt? Have you ever calculated for your household how much of your money is going to service debt? Have you ever looked at, let's say, your $2,500 mortgage or $2,000 mortgage, and if you actually looked, I've been paying on that for 3 years, and you realize $1,800 or $1,900 of that $2,000 is going just to service the interest. When you pay that $2,000 check and you're like, I'm 1 month closer to owning my house, and you look at it and you're like, you mean I paid $100 on principal? $100? $1,900 just got poured down the financial matrix hole? Now I'd ask you this way. What if you owned your house outright? If you understand what I just said, that's like going on offense and giving yourself a $1,900 a month raise. Crazy. Crazy. So the common saying for the status quadrant, let's buy it. We can afford the monthly payments. Woohoo! Now the problem with this, you keep doing that. It's like, because you're always saying, next year I'll make more money so we can do that. What happens the first year? Some glitch in the plan. It's like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a strategy until you're punched in the face. Has life punched anybody in the face before, financially? Anybody lost a job? Anybody got a health challenge? When you got husband and wife both out there, man, combined income, we make $400,000 a year. But if you're spending $400,000 a year, you're still not getting ahead. And what happens if one of the couple either loses a job or something changes or a health challenge, and for 6 months they don't make an income? Thankfully, the banks are very understanding of that. I'm sure your bank will call you up and say, hey, John, we hear your wife's having some health challenges. You just hold those payments. Don't worry. We're not even going to accumulate interest because we care. You think that happens? Or they say, we'll take your house. We'll go ahead and take your cars. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. All of it, fireside sales. And here's this status person that on the surface looked good, smelled good, everything looked awesome. And then one tug of the bobber and they go under. You say, oh, that doesn't really happen that often. It happens all the time. In 2008, it happened so many times, even the auctioneers couldn't keep up. The auctioneers come to your house when you've lost everything and they sell off all the things that you thought you owned, but you actually just owed. It's interesting because if you read Thomas Stanley's book, Millionaire Next Door, he said the shocking thing about auctioneers is they're twice as likely to be millionaires as any other profession. They're twice as likely. Do you know why that is? Because auctioneers get real life examples of people that thought they were doing really good until one tug of the bobber bankrupted them. And they come in and they see story after story of hurting families, and it registers with them. This spending less than you make is not just a principle, it's something that needs to be lived. And so auctioneers become millionaires at twice the rate of any other profession, according to Millionaire Next Door, for that very principle. Listen, if you're in the status quadrant, let me tell you something. The banks love you. You are their favorite clientele. And they're pulling for you to make more money because they know when you make more money, they make more money. Because they know you don't have the discipline to say no, even for just a couple years, to live debt-free, so that they receive 20, 30, 40 years. Your best efforts are poured into the financial matrix whole because you haven't learned to say no for just a couple years so that you can live debt-free. It's a very painful truth. But each one of, whether you're in the broke quadrant, whether you're in the tightwad quadrant, whether you're in the status quadrant, the answer is the same. The answer to your challenge is in the green box. You can take this information. There's so many that think, well, if you're making good money, then you don't need the green box. Au contraire. You need to learn the principles of defense. If you're playing good defense, then you don't need the green box. Au contraire. You need to learn offense. If you're in the broke quadrant, you just pretty much need to learn everything. But the good news is you can, and you can move to this. There's a path from the tightwad to financially free. There's a path from the broke to the financially free. There's a path from the status to the financially free. What does a financially free quadrant do? They play offense and defense and compound it over time to live outside of the financial matrix. They owe no one anything, and all the money they make outside of paying taxes, they get to keep their money so it compounds for them. Can you imagine doing that year after year and watching your dreams grow, and you can do it living a cash lifestyle? Is anybody interested in learning that? You got it. You have it. Improving your defense, improving your skills to go on better offense. This group lives their dreams debt-free. The common saying for this group, and by the way, 1 out of 100 people, no more than 1 out of 100 people. If you talk to 100 people, you'll find one that's truly living a financially free lifestyle. The common saying, let's sleep on it first. And then if we truly want it, let's set a goal for it. Oh, but Orrin, we already have the cash for it. We could go buy it right now and pay cash for it. Yep, you could. But why would you rob the motivation that whatever it is you want? Man, we want to take that vacation and we have the money. Use it as motivation to set a better goal, and you can even improve your offense even further. So it's not saying no, it's just delaying the gratification so that you can use whatever it is as inspiration to go further. The common danger of the financially free quadrant is when you start thinking that you've arrived. That, man, now that I've made it, hey, and you kind of like close the doors like, I'm financially free and everybody else is on their own. That's not the right spirit. The right spirit for someone that gets financially free ought to be, well, then take those principles. Like I always say, man, if I talk to someone in the financially free, I tell them to get the green box. Because everybody they know, if they're the one, that means there's 99 of their friends that aren't the one. And that they need this help. When you've been blessed, it's important to be a blessing. And so you can take the principles that you learn that work for you and teach other people how to get out of the financial matrix. Now let's put it all together. Let's put it all together into the 45-year plan. Here is the financially free 45-year plan. You see the offense? It's moving up. If you go read the Financial Fitness Times, you'll read stories of people that have received 15, 20% raises where they work. Why? Because they developed skills. They developed skills that were marketable. And their bosses came up to them as, man, your attitude has changed so much. We would like to give you a special assignment, and it comes with a 10% raise. And so now you're starting to get raises above the cost of living. But look, now this is the key one. Notice what happens to the defense. Just because your offense went up doesn't mean the defense, your expenses have to increase with it. Can you see as that gap keeps getting further and further? When the income's going up, but the expenses are staying steady, what happens is that gap can be taken and thrown against your debt until you're living debt-free. Then it gets crazy, because watch what happens. Look at the debt. Look at your debt. You, like most people, have figured out, oh no, at 30 years old, you realize, look at my debt. I bought a house, I've got a car, I've got a student loan, and you've got this debt way significantly higher than your income. But instead of being complacent there, you're saying, you know what? I'm going to go on offense, improving my skills. I'm going to keep my defense and delay my gratification. And year after year, as that gap increases, what are you doing? Hammering debt. See that debt go down? By the time you're 40 years old, if you do this for 10, 15, 20-year period, increasing your offense, keeping your defense steady, every single person in this room in the next 15 to 20 years could be 100% out of the financial matrix. Does that interest anybody here? Man. If you say, I don't know if that can happen, then I'd say read these stories, because every one of these stories is someone that did what I'm proposing that you do. Is it going to take work? Is it going to take discipline? Is it going to take a community of other people encouraging you to stay the course? Absolutely. Look at your dreams, though. Every year as you're wiping out debt, as you're paying down debt, you're no longer pouring money down the financial matrix hole, which means your dreams are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time you're 40, can you imagine being 40 years old and having no debt? That $1,500, $2,000 a month that goes into the financial matrix just for your mortgage, it goes into your dream, your bucket list. What type of vacation could you take after 3 or 4 months having $8,000, $10,000 cash sitting there? You're like, you know what? We're going to set a goal to go on vacation. But honey, we already have the cash. Yeah. But if we set a goal, we could improve our income even more and make it even more fun. This is the financially free. Does this graph look a little bit better than the average 45-year plan of 95% of Americans? Well, then let's talk turkey. Come on now, tell me exactly then, what do I need to do to make that happen? 3 steps, just 3 steps. Separate you from all of your dreams debt-free. The first one I talked about, learn how to play defense. The second one, learn how to play offense. And here's the third one, and I started hinting at this one just a few seconds ago. You gotta find a community. And let me tell you why. Because the best information in the world, the green box is filled with the absolute best financial information in the world. But the best information in the world is not power. You hear the saying, knowledge is power. And I'm here to tell you that knowledge alone is not power. Knowledge applied is power. What the community does is it provides the inspiration to apply the information. All of us know how to be financially free. I could bring every single one of you up here individually and say, how would you get wealthy? And we could talk for a bit, and eventually this would come out. Well, I guess if you spend less than you make and compound it over time, you would get wealthy. And I would say, winner, winner, chicken dinner. That's exactly right. And then I would turn to you and say, now that you have the knowledge, show me the wealth that you created, since you certainly know this. And you'd be like, well, you see, I'm like, what happened? You knew it, but you didn't do it. And what happened is you had the information, but you didn't have the inspiration. I could take you to free libraries filled with books that you can check out for free, and I could walk you through, and I bet you I could put 10, 15, 20 books, and I say, if you read these books and apply the information from these books, it would change your life amazingly. And yet all those books are in libraries around the world. And how many lives are not being changed? See, it's not the information. It's the lack of inspiration. It's the lack of accountability. It's the lack of a community that's doing those things and encouraging you to change those habits that have been holding you back. Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. The financially wealthy person, they're wealthy because they repeatedly do the right habits. They found the inspiration to apply the inspiration. For most people, because they're swimming in a current of other people, everybody trying to keep up with the Joneses, all of them are going into the financial matrix tank because they're trying to race each other down a hole. And I'm pointing you in a different direction. But it's so countercultural that left to yourself, if you go to your friends, guess what? I'm going to spend less than I make. And they're going to laugh at you. Man, I'm going to do that. In 10 years, I'm going to have this, and they're going to laugh at you. You won't make it 6 months. And on your own, that may be true. But what if you associated with a community that would celebrate when you wiped out a credit card debt? What if you were around a group that you could send out a message and it would go to everybody in the community that would hear your testimony? What if you got written up on the front page of the Financial Fitness Times? What I'm saying is that birds of a feather flock together. That you start associating with different people, you start accumulating different habits. And as you take those different habits and apply it over time, you start accumulating the income that used to be poured down the financial matrix hole. Join a community of like-minded people. Now because some of you are like, well, how do I know this defense and offense is even the right thing? Who says, Orrin? So I figured I would I could put up 50 names of extremely wealthy people and point to everything that they teach on finances you would find in the financial fitness. But I figured, why do 50 when I can point you to the wealthiest investor of all time? That this gentleman, starting from nothing, who invested $5,000 to get started, and he compounded that $5,000. I'm going to read you his quotes. Let's see if his quotes tie in with what I've been teaching you so far. Warren Buffett, here's what, he didn't say the word defense, but I'll read you the quote and you tell me if this is not teaching the defense. Warren Buffett, I think the biggest mistake is not learning the habits of saving properly early, because saving is a habit. That sounds like defense to me, doesn't it? I mean, what does he know? He's only the second wealthiest person in the world. But Orrin, everybody knows if you want to make a lot of money, you got to have a lot of money. And since most of us don't have money, you got to leverage money. You got to borrow money to make money, right? Haven't you heard that? If you borrow money at this rate and make money at that rate and you make the difference, other people's money, use other people's money. Well, let's see what Warren Buffett says about this. And by the way, I teach the same thing. Do not leverage money, because all you're doing is you're dangling a sword above your head on the smallest piece of string. And the first cut of that sword, boom, you're gone. Is that the way to live? What did Buffett say? Why, he says, if you're smart, you're going to make a lot of money without having to borrow. Wow. Wait a minute. Warren Buffett, the second wealthiest person, the number one wealthiest investor, has never borrowed money to make money. So if you don't agree with that statement, don't argue with Mr. Woodward. Argue with Mr. Buffett. What about offense? What did Warren Buffett teach on offense? The best investment you can make is an investment in yourself. I mean, how many times you hear people, I'm going to buy this extra house, I'm going to buy this property, and I'm going to flip this, and I'm going to do that. And they'll spend all kinds of money on some material thing, And then you turn around and say, would you like to start a personal development program to improve your skills? They look at you like deer in the headlights. What are you talking about? I don't have money for that. You don't have money to invest in the only brain you're ever going to be issued? I mean, I've seen people, they get a fancy car and they're like, nothing but the absolute best gas. I get the double, triple premium gas for this baby. That engine's going to be treated with care. Would you like to get on a personal development program? Heck no, my brain's worthless. But this car, this will get the best. Does anybody see how crazy that is? It's your brain that produced the results to get the car, unless you borrowed it and your brain's hurting you. Okay. Put a smile on that one. Okay. What does he say? Oh, well, here's another statement. The more you learn, the more you'll earn. Warren Buffett in 1991 talked to the Notre Dame graduating class. And he said, I'll give you $100,000. Right now, I will write you a check for $100,000. Come back and sign the contract. I want 10% of your income earning potential for the next 40 years, and I'll give you $100,000 right now. And then he said something key for offense. But, if you take a Dale Carnegie public speaking class and develop your ability to communicate your ideas better, I will write you a check for $150,000 right now for 10% of your income earning potential. He said the best class I ever took was a Dale Carnegie personal development class on learning how to public speak, because I realized if I was going to be a big investor, I needed to learn how to communicate my ideas, which he's done so well speaking around the world, writing reports that people read from 40 years ago still on the principles of money. Warren Buffett practiced what he preached. So you have defense. You have offense. Now let's break it down to the green box. How does the green box apply those principles that I've just read? Well, first of all, we've mentioned financial defense. When you get the green box, do not set the green box on your shelf to admire its green look. Yes, I put this underneath my pillow, and by a process of osmosis, I am getting smarter by the day. Because it will not happen. Just as if you buy exercise bike and don't lose weight, nothing wrong with bike. If you buy green box and do not get financially fit, nothing wrong with box. It must be applied. Learn and apply the financial fitness program defense. And specifically for defense, we have a monthly program designed to help you apply the defensive principles. It's called the Financial Fitness Program. If you notice every single product, we do not produce a product that does not help you escape the financial matrix. We understand that information married to inspiration will equal success. And every product we produce has a specific reason to help you escape the matrix. The Financial Fitness Services has the protector, identity theft. If anybody's lost their identity online and realize how much money that has cost you, you will understand that playing a good defense, having that product, awesome. If you've ever had a situation where you lost a loved one and they didn't have a will, and you go to probate and 10, 15, 20% of their net worth is lost and haggling with probate lawyers, etc., you'll be thankful that you have a prepaid legal setup to where you can have your will. Everybody here should have a will. But I don't plan on dying. Nobody does. The Saver program. If you're going to spend money anyway, then you might as well buy it and save 10, 15, 20% or more through the Saver program. And here, one of the keys is the tracker. Do you know that if a person would just start tracking their expenses, so much is revealed when you can just look at it like, I had no idea I was spending that much money in this area. I'm going to make changes. That program, the Financial Fitness Services, is a gold mine of defensive information, all available to you. And when you read the green box, you'll understand. It's never an expense to invest in better information applied. What about the financial offense? Again, take the green box, learn and apply the financial fitness principles. I love this next one. commit to a personal development program. This is the one in America that most people are losing. 50%, everybody in the broke quadrant and everybody in the tight quadrant, they've lost out on the simple principle of a planned offense. The beginning of all offensive strategies is read, listen, associate, and apply. When you pick up the green box, you've got books in here. You have a workbook in here. You have CDs in here. You have information to apply. Start reading, listening, and associating today. If you do not know, if you're flatline on that offense, the reason you're flatline is you're violating Buffett's rule on the more you learn, the more you earn. And the personal development, oh, here's the second one. Work with your mentor. When you buy the green box, you bought it from somebody. That person is committed to help you because you've just joined a community. When you get the green box, you are now part of a community of other people journeying from those three quadrants into the financially free. You're part of a team. You've got the green box, but it's not by yourself or even for yourself. You're part of a team of people escaping the financial matrix. You can win together as a team. Look at the products that are available. You have Rascal Radio. I call it the Pandora of personal development. Anybody ever had Pandora? You got a favorite band and you put that band in there and they'll play all the music associated with it? What if you did the same with your personal development? You start listening to all the speakers like, oh man, Chris Brady, he's my favorite. And you put Chris Brady in there and it starts popping up all the CDs, all the audios from Chris Brady that you can listen to right from your smartphone. It's on demand personal development information. A life library is filled with 5, 10, 15-minute clips of different content that you can take and apply immediately into your life to improve. A leadership platform that has people like Jim Rohn, Jack Welch, all of the big names are in that leadership platform, all included in there. Audiobooks, language learning, and a sales training. If you want to improve your offense, learn how to influence people. As Buffett said, just one class on public speaking was worth $50,000 more for him. What's it worth to you? The concepts are so no-brainer because you play defense, you play offense, you have a community to do so. And look at this one. The financial fitness community. The financial fit. Look, I love these 3 A's. I love this community. I love being here sharing with you. The 3 A's of every community. Successful community. Association, accountability, and acclamation. I mentioned earlier, birds of a feather flock together. Learn from those who have the results. When you see someone up here on the stage speaking and teaching, there are people who have produced the results. We don't put somebody up here and say, what do you think you're going to do? We bring people up here to speak and teach on subjects where they are proven to have produced the results over time. The inspiration leads to the application, and the culture that we've created starts to change the conduct of the individuals within the community. Remember how habits, you are what you repeatedly do. If we change your habits, we've changed your life. That's the association. The accountability. The accountability. If I told you how to lose weight today, I could sum it up very quickly and I'd say, well, if you burn more calories than you take in, repeated over time, you will lose weight. And you're like, come on, Orrin. Everybody knows that. Well, if everybody knows that, how has Weight Watchers produced a multi-million, closing in on $1 billion business? Where they gather people together, they get people together in a community so that they can, listen to this, celebrate each other's success. Encourage one another during the process. To take the information and ensure there's some inspiration behind it. They actually gather together in a community to talk about principles that all of them, quote, know, but they need the inspiration to do. In the same way, the green box has accountability, starting with yourself. Make commitments to yourself and follow through on them. Starting to other people in the community, you made a commitment to the team that I'm going to follow these principles. I'm going to escape the financial matrix. And then find a mentor. Find someone that has produced the results you want and look them in the eye and make commitments and keep them. That's what accountability is. You have association, you have accountability, and then the acclamation. That's recognition for a job well done. This is so unique because in the world, they actually celebrate when you go into debt. Whoa, that's a nice looking guy. Oh, congratulations on getting that new house. How many years you take? I mean, you go listen to the information and they don't even tell you what a thing costs anymore. They just tell you the monthly payments. They've got you so far down the financial matrix hole, they don't even tell you the right information anymore because they assume you don't want it. I want to walk through something because I think when you decide to go and really take this thing to the next level, I think so many people get confused on investment and expense. And investment is something in you and is absolutely essential according to Buffett. Expenses, pouring money down the financial matrix hole, is one of the craziest, most insane acts a person can do. We're trying to help you stop being insane and invest in yourself so that you can get free. I don't understand why a person would resist the avenue of escape, especially if they've lived in the matrix for 5 or 10 years. If you've been in a situation and you have not been able to change your results, probably one of the best advice I could give you is stop taking your own advice. It's not working. Change the advice. Listen to this. There were 18 million cars sold in the United States of America last year. Out of the 18 million cars, the vast majority of them were borrowed money, bank loans. But 1/3 of them were this new creation over the last decade or 15, 20 years called car leases. 1/3 of the 18 million cars are leased. What that is you get the right to drive somebody else's car and pay for all the depreciation and pay for all of the lost value of that vehicle. You basically rent the car and pay depreciation on it. If I told you out of the 6 million cars that were leased last year, the average lease payment was $412. Now, I'm not saying go turn in your lease and pay huge fines, whatever. What I'm saying is start applying the principles in the green box. And the next time when you're ready for a new car, you can buy a used car. I would never drive a used car. That wouldn't look cool in front of my friends. It would look really cool in this group of people that are escaping the financial matrix. So what group are you trying to look cool for? The status group? The broke group? The tightwad group? Or the financially free group? Because if you start looking cool to the financially free group, you'll be financially free. We told you about the green box, but it's really not our choice. We're throwing the ball to you. It's your shot. Take your shot. God bless you guys.
You've been listening to the Financial Fitness audio series. For more information, please go to financialfitnessinfo.com. We hope this information proves valuable in creating a better financial future for you. The information presented in this audio is for general education purposes only and provides information the speakers believe to be accurate on the subject matter covered. It's sold with the understanding that neither the speakers nor the producers are providing advice for any particular portfolio or for any individual's particular situation, or rendering investment advice or other professional services such as legal or accounting advice. If expert assistance in areas that include investment, legal, and accounting advice is needed, please seek a competent professional's services. This audio may make reference to performance data collected over various periods of time. Remember that past results do not guarantee future performance. Performance data, as well as laws and regulations, change over time, which could affect the applicability of the information presented in this audio. Any data presented herein is used merely to illustrate the underlying principles. This audio is not to serve as the basis for any financial decision or as a recommendation of any specific investment. No warranty is made with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. And both the speakers and producers specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this audio.